Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 true unexplained events reported by cemetery workers, we journey deep into Europe's oldest graveyards, where history sleeps in stone, and the silence is older than language itself. These are the confessions of those who tend the dead, caretakers who've seen candles flicker in sealed crypts, heard footsteps echo beneath the soil, and watched shadows move where no living person should be. Every account you're about to hear was told by someone who walks among the tombstones after midnight, people who've buried their fear as often as they've buried the bodies, and yet still know, not everything that rests beneath the ground stays still. My goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of you listen and vanish without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what hour of the night it is for you. And if your town has a cemetery that truly unsettles you, type its name below. Because in Europe's forgotten graveyards, when the fog rises and the earth shifts, sometimes the dead remember how to move. Kill the lights, silence the world, take a slow breath, and let us begin. I took the night shift because Berlin is different after midnight. The city turns into long, empty streets. The S-Bahn rattles in the distance like an old heater, and sound carries farther than it should. I like that calm. I like watching places sleep. That's the only reason I said yes when the foundation offered me the caretaker position at the Jewish cemetery on the edge of the district. Most people pictured horror movie fog and toppled stones, but the place in daylight was sunlight on ivy, cats on warm marble, the faint hum of trams over on the main road. It was ordinary in the way old things get when you live with them. I worked 4 nights a week, sunset to sunrise. My boss, a careful woman named Adler, did the paperwork and the family appointments during the day. 2 part-timers mowed, trimmed, and patched pathways. On nights it was me, a thermos, a small office with 2 monitors, and a feed from 5 cameras, the main gate, the north wall, the path to the maintenance shed, the office interior, and a roving camera that we hung under the eaves near the old chapel when we needed it. We had a motion sensor on the main gate because some people like to test locks or sneak in for the kind of photos that get likes. Usually motion overnight meant foxes, hedgehogs, or wind-moving leaves. The night it started, the U-Bahn had been on strike during the day, and the commuters were cranky. I took the bus in. The air had that early spring bite that fools you into thinking it's warmer than it is until you stop moving. I clocked in, did the walk, checked the locks on the shed and chapel, and stood for a moment at the main gate while a couple walked by on the sidewalk outside, not seeing me, their conversation quiet and quick. I locked the gate with a heavy iron key, the kind that wants 2 hands. The click echoed. I tugged on it out of habit. No give. Back in the office, I poured coffee, wrote closed in the log for 2011, and checked the feeds. The main gate camera showed the skeletal black shape of the bars against the street. The neighbor's awning still lit like a small island of color. The sensor showed secure. I put on a podcast and started the rounds I always do. Trash bags collected, a corner where a stone had settled too low marked for the day crew, a small bottle left at a grave gathered for safekeeping so it wouldn't become broken glass. Half an hour later, I made a second note in the log. Nothing unusual. Sometime after midnight, when the city is quiet enough that the sound of a single cyclist is a whole event, the motion notification pinged on the monitor. I touched the screen to bring up the main gate and saw the bar standing wide open to the street. Not ajar. Open. The camera timestamp said 0:28. I was already up, key ring swinging from my belt. There are a few moments in this job that teach you how you're going to react under pressure. Stranded dog. Teenagers who don't like being told the party is over. The one time a drunk man tried to climb the wall and cut his hand and bled like a stuck pig, and cried about his father until the ambulance came. You tell yourself you will be orderly and smart, and then you find yourself speed walking toward metal and shadows while your heart drums hello behind your ribs. At the gate, the streetlight threw light in pale pools across the sidewalk. No one. The bars stood open on their hinges like a surprised mouth. The lock hung there, not broken, not even scratched. I knew how it worked. The iron key throws the bolt, but the bolt only engages when the gate is properly aligned and the receiver plate sits flush. You can't fake it closed. You can slam it all night and you'll just make noise. There was no damage. There were no scuffs like someone had forced it. I checked the hinges. The pins were in. The steel was cool through my gloves. I closed it, forced my shoulders into the bars to get it snug, turned the key until it clicked, then tugged hard. Solid. I stood there 5 minutes because that felt like the right amount of time to prove to myself that physics still worked. I went back to the office, wrote "gate open," secured for 0036, and rewound the footage. You've probably watched enough security camera videos to know the look. Grainy grayscale. The world turns into a chessboard. Everything either shadow or fluorescent glow. At 0:27:58, the bars sat closed. At 0:28:01, the left bar began to swing inward. Nobody pushed it. The slow arc looked exactly like it looks when I open it myself. 3 seconds later, the right bar followed. There was no hand on it. I watched it 3 times. I watched it frame by frame. The sensor log showed no spike. The wind, I told myself. It had to be the wind. I checked the other feeds. The trees weren't moving any more than they always do. The streetlight wasn't swaying. The flag at the shop across the street hung limp. I slept badly that day. Cold, artificial sleep full of moments when your body thinks you're falling. I woke up angry that my brain had treated an unlatched gate like a ghost in the house. It wasn't a ghost. It was a hinge or a pin or a new imperfection in old iron. The second night, I was almost eager to catch the mistake. I closed the gate like it owed me money. I double-checked the bolt. I logged the time, and for the first hours, nothing happened. A fox trotted down the center path at 22:14, thin and confident. At 23:02, a bike patrol slowed, lights throwing white stripes on the walls. At 01:09, the transmitter pinged again. I looked up and saw the gate open to the night like a wound. I was at it in a minute, breath visible in small white bursts. The lock hung where I had left it. The bolt was thrown. The bars had moved anyway. I didn't rewind first. I walked the street outside the fence. I checked the neighboring shop's door, peered into the dark of the little bakery that closed at 6, listened for running feet. It was dead out there. It was Berlin asleep and unfriendly to anyone who wanted attention. Back in the office, I called Adler. It was late to call your boss, but an open gate means liability, and she had always said to wake her if something felt wrong. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice sounded clear, alert in the way that tells you she wasn't in a deep sleep. I told her what I'd seen. She was quiet a second, then said, "Wind tunnels. We see it sometimes in summer with storms. I'll have someone from the security company check the hinge pins in the morning. Keep the log very exact, please." I wanted her to laugh and tell me I'd done the lock wrong. Something basic. But exact was what I had, so exact was what I wrote. Then I rewound the footage. If the first night had been uncanny, the second night was the same, just twice. The bars moved with no one near them at 01:09:02. They moved again at 03:17:44. Both times the motion was smooth. The bolt didn't fight. The metal didn't scrape the receiver plate. It was like watching your own hand do something from far away. The only difference the second time was that the streetlight got brighter for a second. A voltage spike the camera auto-corrected for. In the morning, a technician named Mehmet came with a toolbox and neat hair and a habit of glancing at the stones as if someone might be reading over his shoulder. He pulled the hinge caps, slid the pins out, checked for wear, greased them, and tapped them back into place while I watched. He pointed at the bolt. "It's fine. You see?" He threw it and showed me how the metal lined up. He said, "Sometimes old doors remember how they want to sit. Settling, you know." He meant that the whole world has a memory, and we stand there pretending our adjustments matter. I nodded and pretended I believed him. That night I closed the gate and set a small strip of blue painter's tape over the seam where the bars met. A trick from a forum post I had read about whether your roommates were sneaking into your room. If the tape was torn, someone had pushed. If the tape was intact and the gate was open, then the someone was something like me with my hand on the iron even if I hadn't moved. At 02:03, the tape peeled backwards on camera, fluttered once, and then was simply no longer there. I found the strip folded in half and stuck to the bottom of the bar. I hadn't put it that low. I wrote that down. I felt stupid writing that down. 3 days into the problem, Adler asked me to pull clips so she could show the board. I put together a folder with timestamps and I wrote exactly what I had done. Lock engaged, bolt thrown, tugged. Camera shows gate opening at specific times. Tape moved. Hinges greased. Guard on duty is me. Tow truck noise at 0302 irrelevant. Fox at 2214 irrelevant. She thanked me and said she would be in the office at noon to review the paper logs. I had been writing in them as always, time and brief note, and my handwriting is neat from years of carrying a little book when I did electrical work, noting breakers and panel numbers. The gate had trained your hand to be a certain kind of precise person, or it had trained precise people to be its hand. I wasn't sure which. At noon, I was putting on my jacket when she came in with the log open in her hands. She didn't look upset. She didn't look anything. She put the book on the desk, slowly, like it was something delicate we were both afraid of breaking, and turned it so I could read a page I knew I had filled. "Tell me about 0317, she said. "It's the time it kept happening," I said. "A couple of nights in a row, after the hinge work. I wrote it there. You can see." "I can," she said. "And now look at this." Beneath my notes, neat and precise, was a line in my handwriting that I had not written. It read, 0317 gate closed. Person present. The signature initial next to it was mine, the little serif I put on my K like a habit I couldn't stop. I felt my mouth open before any words came out. The line above, the one noting the open gate, was mine. The line below looked exactly like mine, but I had been home asleep in the hour the log suggested it was added. I could account for my walk, my bus, the stop at the bakery for a roll, the goodbye to Mehmet at the gate. I could show my bus ticket. But there it was, in ink that had bled the way our pens bleed, blue, not black. "Someone mocked it up," I said. "You can forge anyone if you try." "I thought that," she said, and she pulled out her phone. So I checked the office camera for the time. "Watch." She scrubbed to 031640. The office sat exactly as it sits when you're away. The chair pushed under, the mug on the desk, the small fan angled at the corner because the room runs hot even in winter. At 031701 I came into the room. I sat down. I took the log from the shelf. I wrote a line. I put the log back. I stood, and as I turned to go, the camera caught my profile. My scar on the chin from a bike crash when I was a kid. The way I tend to touch the pocket where the keys sit. A little tap. The date showed the morning I had been home. The timestamp matched the line. I've replayed what I felt 100 times to try to find some detail I can hang on to that explains why I kept my voice even and said, "Someone used my key and jacket." It might have been brave. It might have been cowardice. She said, "We should call the police." I imagined explaining a copy of myself to a man who broke up fights outside bars as part of his day. I also imagined doing nothing, and then something worse happening that would feel preventable only in retrospect. "Call them," I said. The officers were gentle in the way of people who have seen many kinds of grief and nonsense and don't yet know which you are. They looked at the gate. They looked at the hinges. They took the log. They watched the clips while I watched their faces. The younger one frowned when the bars moved by themselves, and the older one tilted his head like he was trying to hear the metal speak. When they reached the office footage of me at 0317, the younger one said, "Is there another entrance?" It was easier to answer a question like that than the one he probably meant. "No," I said. "Roof is pitched, no ladder, only gate. Walls are topped with iron. If he got in by the gate." I didn't say he. I didn't want to say I. They asked for my alibi, which I gave. They took my statement, and they took the hard drive copy I had made. They asked about disgruntled workers, threats, exes. The young one joked lightly about exes. Adler did not laugh. She sat with her hands folded in her lap. The room felt like a place with too much air. That evening, I felt a fatigue behind my eyes, like staring too long at reflective water. I thought about calling off, switching with Lucas from the day crew who sometimes did nights when I was sick, but I couldn't bear the idea of someone else watching my cameras. My cameras? The possessive showed me something I didn't really want to see about myself. I went in early before the sun fully fell, so that I could close with the daylight and stand in it if I needed to before the dark began. I locked the gate and sat in the office with the lights off for a long time, just listening to the room. Buildings have their own weather. This one had the faint metal click of heat in the pipes and the little voice of the fan when it starts. I held the log open to a blank page. I told myself that if I was going to be accused by a video of being myself, I might as well be here when I did it. At 23:58, the main gate feed bloomed a little brighter, and then steadied. 10 minutes later, the motion sensor pinged. The bars were open. I felt strange walking toward it that time, like I had already done it and also like I was watching myself do it. I closed it, threw the bolt, and lingered with my hand on the metal before I went back. I wrote the time. I wrote closed. I wrote my initial small and tight. Somewhere around 1 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Lucas. He had heard from Adler, who did not share confidential details, but who had asked him whether he had given anyone a copy of a key. He wrote, "We should swap tomorrow. Get some rest." I typed a thank you and put the phone face down. The screen had its own gravity. I did not want any more faces in the room tonight, even friendly ones. At 03:16 I stood. The office camera later would show me doing this. I know because I watched it later to prove to myself that I had not moved the way I remembered. I walked to the door and didn't open it. I stood with my hand on the knob until the minute ticked over to 03:17, and then I let go. My hand looked like my father's when he taps the steering wheel at lights. I sat down again. I did not touch the log. The page lay open, and a breeze that could not have been a breeze turned the bottom corner up and laid it back down. On the main gate feed, the bars swung wide, smooth and easy like they weighed nothing at all. A shadow stood just to the left of the frame. I turned the camera with my trackpad, the small motor humming, and it caught the shape of a man standing very still just outside the gate on the sidewalk. He wore my coat. He had my posture. He looked at that distance and in that light like me. He didn't look at the camera. He didn't look at the gate. He leaned as if he were listening to the iron, and then he put his hand out and touched the bar. I made the mistake of moving quickly. I told myself later that this was the mistake, that if I had gone slow I would have seen something else, but that's a lie. We tell ourselves we could have earned a different truth if we had walked in on different feet. I went fast. I took the keys off their hook and almost dropped them. I ran. My knee clipped the corner of the desk and I cursed, and the sound of my voice felt like it belonged to the camera, not to me. The gate was open when I got there. The street was empty. I looked left and right twice like a driver at an unfamiliar intersection, and the far end of the block was just a rectangle of darker dark. No people, no me. I stepped out and turned my back to the cemetery, and an animal part of my mind flinched at having the stones behind me and the street in front. My breath came hard and white. I closed the bars again and let the lock catch and felt something like a shiver through the metal, like the gate had sighed and settled into a favorite chair. I stood with both hands on it. My palms chilled. Back in the office, I went to the log because I couldn't help it. On the open page in my small, neat hand, there was a line I hadn't written. 03:17 gate closed. Person present. The ink glistened as if it had only just been put down. I touched it with a finger and got the smallest smear of blue. The office camera recorded me doing that, touching my own handwriting and looking at the blue on my fingertip like the answer was there. I scrubbed back to the minute, and there I was on the screen, sitting down, writing, standing up. The live me and the recorded me existed on 2 monitors on the same desk, both looking more tired than I had ever felt. What you want here is a conclusion. You want the police to come back with a technical explanation that satisfies a part of you that still thinks machines are honest. Or you want a story about an ancestor with your face and a date on a stone that matches your birthday. You want something you can repeat in a bar. I didn't get that. I got something heavier and duller. I got routine. For the next 7 nights, the gate opened at 03:17 with 3 minutes of drift in either direction that felt like a joke, only I was being told. I started leaving the bears locked with a second chain that I ran through the central lattice, a chain that made closing it into a puzzle that needed 2 hands and time. The gate opened anyway. The chain hung loose like a scarf in the morning breeze. I moved the camera closer, but angles didn't help when the thing you're watching refuses to be a thing. I wore a different jacket. The man on the sidewalk wore it too. I changed my hat. He bowed his head to show me the same brim. I texted Lucas a picture of the screen without a caption. He sent back a prayer hands emoji and then, "Come sleep at mine after." I'm close, I never did. I didn't want to carry whatever this was into someone else's house. Adler handled it like a problem with a contractor that complicates budgets. She brought me tea in the mornings when I came off shift and set it on my desk as if I were sick. She told me we would replace the entire gate. She said the board approved the cost. A local shop came out with a measuring tape and a man who knew iron the way I know the backs of my hands. He said we can put in a new bolt and an electronic strike. New hinges. A closer that resists. You won't have trouble." He wrote an estimate and patted the bar as if it were an animal that might get jealous. The last night before they removed the old gate, I walked the cemetery twice at 02 Unexplained. Foxes had made a den behind the shed and I could smell them, that wild, high musk. I stood by the old chapel and listened, and there were the small, polite sounds that belong to places at night. Nothing more. At 0310 I brewed fresh coffee because I thought the ritual mattered, that actions stack up inside rooms and make them different. At 0316 I stood by the office door and didn't open it. At 0317 the bars on the screen moved. The man in my jacket leaned his head. I went out to meet him. I didn't tell anyone I had done that part. It felt like volunteering for something I hadn't read the terms for. I walked to the gate and I didn't stop a meter away like I had been doing. I stepped through. The sidewalk felt very normal under my boots. Diesel heavy from an early truck lived in the air. The street was empty except for me. I looked left and right, and then I looked where the camera had always caught him standing, where I had always seen him from a distance, and I stood there. From that spot, the cemetery looks different. The bars frame the path like a picture. The long line of stones down the central walk becomes a corridor. I heard my own breath, and I heard another breath that matched my rhythm like a child learning to breathe with a parent. I didn't turn around fast. I let my head tilt a little, enough to catch the sense of someone behind my left shoulder. The man stepped up next to me. I felt the air move where his sleeve would be. We looked in together. We stood like that for the length of a held breath, maybe longer. He said my name, my own voice, my accent. Not through my ears exactly, more like through my chest, the way you hear a bass when it's too loud. He said it once, polite, the way people ask you to pass them something heavy. I didn't answer. It felt like saying it back would take something I needed. He moved his hand to the bar. I moved mine because I have a habit of matching people without meaning to. We both touched the iron. It was very cold. Together, without a visible push, the bars closed. The bolt settled home with a mechanical contentment that made me want to cry. He took his hand away. I took mine away. I turned, slower than the urge in my spine wanted me to, and there was nothing beside me but the dark and my own breath again, now shallow like I had been running. In the office, the log was open. I wrote the line. 0317 gate closed. Person present. I signed it with the little serif on my K like I always do. The ink didn't smear when I touched it. They replaced the gate. It's beautiful if you like that kind of thing. The new iron is black as a wet road, and the bolt makes a different, more modern sound that bothers me less now than it did in the first weeks. They wired it to an access control panel with a small LED that glows red or green. It logs entries and keeps them in a database. The database shows the gate opening at 0317 on the last Thursday of the month since the new install. The reader shows no card used. The strike shows no activation. The camera shows the bars motionless and closed. The log in the drawer shows a neat blue line at that time anyway. I write it because not writing it doesn't stop it from being true. I work 3 nights a week now. Lucas took one, and a second guy from the security company floats the 4th. Adler said it was better for me. Sometimes I agree. Sometimes I sit up in my small kitchen and listen to the night through the thin walls of my building and picture the gate without me. It isn't jealousy. That would be easier to admit. It's a feeling like leaving a stove on, like the air in a room you forgot to lock. When I'm off shift, I dream of the sound of a hinge settling. When I'm on, I stand at the office door at 0316 and count to 60 and try to feel like a person. A few weeks ago, a rabbi who sometimes comes to say Kaddish with families asked me if I liked the night. I said yes without thinking. He nodded and said, "Night is honest." He meant something different than what I understood, I think. He meant that when all the performances fall away, what stays is truer. I think about that now when I'm writing the line in the log. I don't know what is being honest to me. I know the iron is cold and my name sounds like an object when I hear it in the dark. I know that the gate opens whether I am looking at it or not, and that sometimes when I stand on the sidewalk and try not to move, something that looks like me keeps me company for a minute while we close it together. If you are looking for a rule, I can only offer you this one. Some places learn you. They take the shape of your routines the way a chair takes the shape of your body if you sit in it long enough. Maybe you call that haunting if it makes better sense. Maybe you call it memory in wood and iron. When I am old, if I am lucky enough to be old, I think I will still wake at 0317. I will look at the door of whatever room I am in, and I will wait for the click that says something that needs closing has been closed. And I will not know which of us did it. I will reach out my hand anyway, because that's what I do. Because that's what I learned to do. In a city that is different after midnight, in a place where the night is honest and iron remembers who you are. I took the night shift at Père Lachaise because I liked quiet jobs. People imagine cemeteries as noisy with tourists and camera shutters, and in the day they are. But after closing, when the last group fumbles toward the gates and the security van crawls along the lanes with its blinking light, the great cemetery breathes differently. You can hear the ivy rub against iron railings, the tiny crack of settling stone, the scratch of a hedgehog in the leaves. I liked sweeping the paths and hearing only my own broom and the wind in the plane trees. It felt like working backstage in a theater after everyone's gone home. My name is Etienne. I started in spring when the air still had a bite at night. There were 3 of us rotating evenings. Me, an older man named Luc, and a woman everyone called Madame Rousseau, although she told us to use Claire. She had a sharp walk and soft voice and could find a grave blindfolded. We were supposed to do trash collection, light maintenance, and make rounds to check locks on the columbarium and the older mausoleums. We stayed aware of kids who hopped the walls, drunk lovers who thought the dead didn't mind witnesses. Mostly it was nothing. Mostly. There are sections few tourists visit. People cluster around the famous names, photograph the lipstick kisses pressed to a certain rock star's tomb, leave stones and metro tickets on poets. A different kind of quiet lives away from those roots. I learned the rows by their habits. Row C in Division 67 had a particular smell after sunset, a clean scent like wet linen. It's hard to explain a smell of absence, but that's how it felt. I only learned the map later. The first nights I just walked and noticed things like a bird learns rooflines. The first time I heard her was late, when the lights inside the office trailer were off and Luc had gone home. Security had already done their pass. I saw the taillights at the far gate. I was on my way back from the columbarium, keys heavy on my belt, when the wind shifted and carried a thread of sound. I thought it was a radio in a building beyond the wall. Then I heard it again. De l'eau, water. It was clear but not forceful, like someone too shy to raise their voice. It came from row C. I stopped and listened. The noise of the city, muffled horns, a scooter on the boulevard, moved around the edges. I stood among the stones, waiting. It came again, a little breathier. De l'eau, s'il vous plaît. I did what I always do when something feels off during a night round. I pretended it was nothing and finished the route. I checked the side gate, made a note about a loose hinge, and kept my head down. By the time I closed up the workshop, almost an hour had passed. The air had warmed and the smell of wet linen was stronger, which didn't make sense, because it hadn't rained in days. The next night, before I clocked in, I told Luc. He laughed with his cigarette half stuck to his lower lip.
"The old ones will test you," he said.
"They need to know you're not going to let the kids scratch hearts into their doors. If they ask for water, bring it. If they ask for wine, tell them we have a budget." He said it like a joke, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "You've heard it?" I asked. "Everyone hears something if they walk long enough at night," he said, and then he put his hand on my shoulder in a way that meant either comfort or instruction. "Don't answer out loud. It's like pigeons. Feed once and they'll follow." I worked that evening with his words in my head, and maybe that primed me to hear things. Near midnight it came again, soft from the same direction. De l'eau. I had my flashlight on low and I could see the sloped backs of the headstones, the little stairs into family vaults. I could feel the sound in my throat as if my own mouth had formed it seconds before. I walked toward it and knelt to read the names by the oblique light. The request seemed to gather, like mist around one older grave. It wasn't ornate. A simple oblong of stone with a narrow border, a small marble plaque affixed later over the original inscription. The family name had worn to a whisper. The dates were mid-1950s. Someone had planted rosemary at some point. The bush had survived in a low, stubborn clump. A ceramic photo had cracked on the right edge, and the woman inside, dark hair coiled behind her head, stern eyes, looked frozen mid-breath. The ground wasn't wet. The air still smelled like rain that never fell. I didn't bring water that night. I told myself it was because I was on the clock. Because I didn't want to be the person who encouraged weirdness. Because I needed to ask Claire what our policy was on people asked favors by stones. Mostly it was because I was afraid to be seen carrying a bottle to a grave. The third night I brought a small bottle in my bag. It felt ridiculous hidden under my gloves. I did my rounds, waited for the last scooter wine on the boulevard to fade, and walked to Division 67. The path there is slightly lower. You can feel the drop. In the daytime it's green and open. At night the trees lean toward each other and make a tunnel. I stopped in row C before the grave and set the bottle on the marble ledge. The cap clicked when I twisted it. I poured slowly over the rosemary, watching the dark stems drink. The scent rose like somebody unfolding fresh sheets. I poured until it was empty, and then put the bottle up right next to the cracked photograph. It looked like an offering in a place without a god. I stood for a minute longer and then did what I always do. I finished the route. The next afternoon I ran errands and tried not to think about it. Around 6, when I walked up the lane to clock in, Claire was waiting. She held her clipboard like a shield. "How are you finding nights?" she asked. "They're fine," I said. "Good," she said, a pause wrapped inside the word. If you hear anything strange, please write it down in the log. Not because I don't believe you. Because the only way we keep this place kind to us is by keeping a record of how it speaks." I said I'd write things down. She touched my arm and added, without humor, "And if something asks for water, be careful. We had a problem 10 years ago with a man who brought buckets." "There's a policy about buckets," I said, trying to smile. "There's a policy about flooding," she said. I didn't sleep well before my shift. When I finally woke, the shape of a dream clung to me, a white hand pressing against glass from the other side, leaving a blurry print. It was evening when I went in. Luke was off. Claire handed me the keys and said the police had called about a complaint from a building near the wall, kids throwing stones. "You'll hear them," she said. "Don't go out, call me. Let the security van handle it." By 10, the place had stilled. I worked the far divisions first, giving myself excuses not to pass row C. But you know how it is when you tell yourself not to think about a thing. You draw lines around it so hard that it's all you can see. At midnight, I walked down the little slope. The smell was stronger, not like rain on dust, but like wet fabric hung in a closed room. The bottle from the night before was gone. For a second, I thought some tourist had taken it, but then I felt the cold. The marble around the rosemary was damp. A coin I hadn't seen before stuck to the edge by a film of water. The crack through the woman's ceramic portrait looked wider, as if the photo had tried to open. I reached out to realign the coin and saw it. A damp handprint on the marble border, small and not quite right. The fingers too close together like a child's. The heel of the palm faintly ridged. It faced toward me, as if whoever had pressed it wanted to be seen. I pulled my hand back and the flashlight shook in a way I hate. I wanted to say something ordinary to myself, condensation, prank. But the night had that listening feeling, the kind you get when you say the wrong thing at a family dinner and feel everyone's eyes without any of them moving. I walked away too fast. I checked a gate that didn't need checking. I avoided Division 67 until almost closing. Then did the minimum, passed through at a distance, noted that the bottle was not there, told myself it didn't matter. When I was back in the office trailer filling out the log, I wrote it anyway. Division 67. Row C, request for water, female voice. Brought bottle previous night. Tonight, marble damp, handprint. I hesitated and then added, bottle gone. I didn't sign my name. Who else's handwriting would it be, though? Claire would know. I told myself I was finished with it, but the place doesn't let you be finished. It doesn't work like a conversation you can end. That week I began to notice other small changes. A stain on a mausoleum door like a country on a map. 3 pebbles arranged in a little trail I knew I hadn't made. A lilac smell in a month when lilacs weren't blooming. Row C called like a tooth you can't help touching with your tongue. I started to carry water again without deciding to. It was part of my kit. Gloves, torch, keys, bottle. I poured and I left the bottle, and sometimes the cap would be loose when I came back, as if someone with weak hands had tried to twist it open and managed it on the 2nd or 3rd night. On my 5th visit, while I was crouched and pouring, someone said behind me, "You shouldn't learn its ways." I stood so fast I slopped water on my shoes. A man in a bright orange jacket stood in the path, one of the outside security guys, the kind who drove the van and rattled gates and had no patience with romantic nonsense. He was new to me, or maybe I was new to him. What ways? I asked, feeling foolish because the evidence was in my hand. He nodded toward the bottle. Thirst is a tether, he said. He hooked his thumb toward the wall. You hear the kids sometimes, no? They whistle, so you'll come look. This is like that, but patient. It's just water, I said. He looked at the grave the way a person looks at a dark window to see if a curtain moves. Nothing here is just anything, he said. Dry it up. If you have to talk, don't promise. Don't agree to come back. After he left, the silence felt heavy. I finished the rounds and told myself I wouldn't bring another bottle. For a few nights I didn't. And yet the smell followed me to other divisions, faint, like a folded shirt in a drawer. Twice I dreamed about the handprint again, but closer to my face each time, like it had pressed the glass in my dreams and found it thin. Near the end of the month, Paris had a heat wave. The city struggled and tourists burned and tempers showed. In the cemetery the shade was kind, but the stones held heat. Midway through a shift, sweat sticking my shirt to my back, I passed row C and heard it again. The whisper, more urgent than before. De l'eau, s'il vous plaît. J'ai soif. Please, I'm thirsty. She said thirsty the way a person says hurt. I'm not proud of the next part. I bent to the rosemary and said, as quietly as I could, I'll bring more tomorrow. The next day I missed work. My sister's little boy was sick and I went to their apartment to help. My phone lit up twice with calls from the office that I didn't answer. When I finally slept on their couch, I dreamed I was under the ground, and the sky was a gray slab that flexed in the heat like a living thing, and a woman's voice filtered through the stone as if through a mattress, small and polite and completely without strength. When I returned the following evening, the air in Division 67 was not polite. It was dank and sweet, like water that has sat too long in a vase with dead stems. The path itself had a darker stripe as if something had been dragged. The rosemary was lush as I'd ever seen it. The marble around it was not just damp, it was slick. The damp handprint was there again and another beside it, the fingers offset, as if whoever was pressing couldn't find the right place for their hand. That's when I realized the cap of the bottle from 2 nights before wasn't just twisted off. It was gone. The threads on the neck gleamed as if polished. I put my finger to them and felt a tremor, like the buzz in a metal rail when a train is still far away. For the first time in weeks, I went to the office to look up the grave in the register. We have a room for that, with old ledgers and a computer database that does its best to make sense of 2 centuries. Claire keeps that room orderly in a way that makes me straighten my shoulders when I go in. I typed the division and row and scanned the entries. 3 burials under that family name, none famous, nothing dramatic. The last line, added in black pen years later, said simply, plaque added at family's request. Original name eroded. That bothered me, for no reason I could explain. Names wear away, yes, but you can usually make something out. Here the original given name was scratched down to bare stone. Claire came in while I was staring at the ledger. She looked at the open page, and then at me. You wrote about water in the log, she said. It's not the first time with that grave. What happened last time? I asked. The man with the buckets, she said. He brought them nightly. He said it asked, and asking is harmless. The ground sank. Not all at once, not dramatic, but enough that we had to shore the edge. Do you know how wet soil smells when it has nowhere to go? I think so, I said. He didn't stay long, she added. Not fired, just elsewhere. I asked her who the woman was. She shook her head. The plaque replaced a name that wasn't the name. That's all I'll say. It isn't helpful to know too much here. That night I made myself avoid Division 67. I moved like a man dodging a place where he embarrassed himself once. I did my rounds out of order. I checked on a mausoleum I never check. Somewhere after 2 in the morning, while I was fixing a loose latch in Division 71, I heard water. Not a whisper begging. Actual water. A slow glug-glug like a bathtub emptying in a room across the hall. I followed the sound with my light off to keep my eyes wide. It led me past the columbarium, past the statue of the woman with the broken nose, into the hollow behind Division 67 where the drainage grates are. The glugging wasn't from the grates, it was from row C. When I stepped between the stones, I saw it, a sheen on the path, an edge of standing water like a mirror shaved thin. It came from the older grave. It seeped over the marble border and broke into tiny rivers that escaped across the dirt. I crouched, hand over my mouth, and watched a bubble rise under the thin film. When it popped, the smell that came up was the same as the dream, the thick breath of trapped air. Someone moved behind me then, close enough that my hair lifted. I turned with the light and blinded Luke. He put up a hand and swore. "You don't go alone when you hear running," he said, like a rule he'd said a dozen times, and I had ignored. "You call. There's a reason we have a van, there's a reason Claire goes home before midnight." We stood there and watched it together. He fished out his phone and called the number for the city maintenance office about blockages in the drains. He explained that there was water where no water should be. He hung up and looked at me. "You gave it your word," he said, not unkindly. He pointed to the ground, the thin reflecting lens. "It heard you." "I said tomorrow," I said. "I missed tomorrow." "Here there is only later," he said. We set sand around the grave to keep the spread off the path. Luke took the bottle, the last one I had left there, and put it in the bin with a firm thunk. He said we'd check the pipes the next day, though we both knew there were no pipes under that patch of ground. Before we left, I wiped the marble ledge with my sleeve to clear the prints. When I lifted my arm, the wet handprint came back, ghosting up like breath on a pane. I didn't sleep. When I finally closed my eyes around 10 in the morning, I dreamed. I was in the ossuary under the Chapel of the Dead, which isn't where we keep bones anymore, but where the old stone smells like chalk and secrets. I held a light, and its beam probed a stack of nameless fragments, and water ran between them like the threads on a screw. I woke with my fingernails filled with dust and couldn't tell if it was real, or if I'd clenched my hands so hard I'd broken skin. I called Claire and told her I was sick. She said, "Take tonight, then come in tomorrow at dusk. We'll go together." She had a way of making the cemetery feel like a place under her hand. The next evening, we walked to Division 67 before we did anything else. The path was dry. No sheen. The rosemary looked as if a florist had arranged it. The handprints were gone. The marble showed faint drag marks where the sand had been, but otherwise it was as still as a photograph. We stood quiet a while. Claire rested her fingers on the stone in that careful way she had. "I don't think you should keep nights, Etienne," she said, still looking at the grave. "At least not for a bit." "I can stop bringing water," I said. "That would be good," she said. Then she added, "But thirst is a way in. We dry it out by filling life elsewhere." I nodded, though I didn't know what she meant. She told me to take a week of days. I did, and I spent that week hearing the phrase in stupid places. A faucet, a child with a sippy cup, an old woman asking for a glass at a cafe. Delot, everywhere. I held the rim of my own glass like a thing that could tip either way. When I returned to nights, I didn't take water. The air was cool again and the city had rolled into a gentler season. The scent in row C was less strong. Twice I passed and heard nothing. The third night, at the edge of hearing, the whisper surfaced like a fish. "S'il vous plaît." I didn't answer. I finished the rounds, hands tight on the keys. On my way back, I looked down the row and saw that the bottle I'd last left there, the one Luke had put in the bin, was back on the marble ledge, clean and clear, a little light inside it like a captured moon. The cap was off. Inside the bottle, a palm print fogged the glass from within, as if a small wet hand had grasped it before letting go. I picked it up, although every part of me knew I shouldn't. It was dry. It was warm. The threads on the neck hummed like a faraway train. I carried it not to the office, not to a bin, but to the wall that backs the boulevard. I set it on top of the stones where no one could see it from outside, and no one walking a tour would notice. I told myself that if it wanted me to be the kind of person who always came back, it would have to learn disappointment. Since then, this is months now, I have kept to my job. I sweep, I lock, I write small notes in the log in handwriting I don't recognize as mine. Sometimes a smell follows me that shouldn't exist, and sometimes it doesn't. Once, in the dead center of my week of days, When I was on the metro home and the carriage swayed through that deep section between stations, the lights dimmed for a second and someone near me whispered for water, in a voice so close to my ear that I flinched hard enough to bang my elbow. The woman across from me looked up. I smiled the polite apology of city people and stared at the map until the next stop. 2 nights ago, Luke told me he was moving to a day shift. Too much talking at night, he said, like he meant the foxes and the kids and not the other thing. He clapped my shoulder and let his hand rest there. Don't let it learn your routine, he said. Change the order you walk. Last night I did that. I started near the columbarium and looped back against the map, so row C came in the middle instead of the end. There was no scent. The rosemary was still. The marble was just stone. I stood a full minute listening to the city outside and the nothing in here, and felt almost silly for the way my heart climbed my throat. It was only when I bent to read the chipped ceramic photo again, to fix in my mind that ordinary stern face, that I noticed the damp mark near the bottom of the marble where the plaque overlapped the original name. A line of moisture had beaded along the seam. Above it, something had swelled and let go. The plaque had shifted by a fraction. Beneath it, where the original given name had been scraped down to unlettered stone, damp had darkened the surface into shapes. Not letters, not words, not anything you could show someone else and have them see what you saw. But to me, in that hour and in that light, it looked like a hand pressed to a window from the other side. The 5 ridged pads of a palm and the heel and the wrist trailing down into a narrow blackness like a throat. I wiped it with my sleeve. The print went away. When I lifted my hand, a faint fog returned immediately as if breath. I'm telling you this because I think sometimes the way out of a tether is to lay it down where others can see it. If you come here in the day, you won't find anything. You'll find a rosemary bush that refuses to die, and a cracked photograph and a marble plate over a name nobody says. Bring no coins. Bring no bottles. If a voice asks for water, you can be kind without keeping promises. There are fountains along the paths. The birds use them. If you must pour there. Tonight I will walk a different order again. I will pass row C and not look hard to either side. I will count the steps to the gate and listen to the trees and the small real sounds and not the other kind. And I will carry, in the pocket of my jacket where the bottle used to be, a folded paper with the office number in Claire's neat hand. And I will tell myself that if the ground ever opens like a thirsty mouth, if the scent stiffens like fabric in a closed room and the cap of a bottle appears with its ridges worn smooth, I will call before I kneel. But when I lock the columbarium late, the air moves. It finds the delicate hairs inside the ear, and sometimes in the moment after the key turns, before the click settles into the bones of the door, I hear a breath that isn't mine, and a polite voice practicing a word it knows I know, the one that sounds like kindness and feels like a rope. Delo. I'm a groundskeeper at a parish cemetery in Krakow. I won't name the parish because I still work there, and the idea of people showing up with cameras or candles makes my stomach knot. If you live here, think of any small cemetery tucked behind an old church, the kind with a low brick wall and dumb iron gates that stick in winter. That's close enough. I started 6 years ago after getting laid off from a warehouse job near Nowa Huta. My cousin Marek told me the church needed someone to mow the grass, rake leaves, straighten lanterns, and handle simple burials when the undertaker's crew was stretched thin. It's quiet work, he promised. You'll like the quiet. He wasn't wrong. Most days it's the sound of the tram in the distance, the wind through cypress, and the occasional murmured rosary from an older woman wrapped in a scarf that never seems to come off her head. I keep a small radio in the tool shed but rarely turn it on. There are 3 of us if you count the priest. Father Tomasz is kind to me and to everyone else, though he's strict about money. Anya, who does the flowers and keeps the office ledger, is tougher than she looks. I watched her chase off teenagers one evening with a broom like a witch out of a story. And then there's me, Piotr, who cuts the grass and cleans birds' mess off the cemetery benches, pulls weeds that grow like wire between granite letters, and sets the candles straight when they lean into puddles after rain. You learn people's patterns working a place like this. There's the old man who visits his wife's grave each morning at exactly 8:30, rain or shine, and leaves half a roll with ham on the granite ledge for lunch together. There's a young woman with a university bag who stands at a black stone near the wall and reads out loud for 20 minutes as if someone is auditing her pronunciation. There are the boys who climb the outer fence and run through between the plots as if they're on a maze. I yell at them and they laugh and run off, but less than they used to. There's a limit to how much fun a cemetery can offer when you are actually in it. I learned the stones too. Even when the names blur, Zofia, Stanisław, Helena, repeat. I know which corner freezes first in winter and where water pools whenever the street's drain chokes with leaves. I know which plots settle too fast and need to be topped up with soil, and which stones have no one left to visit them. You can tell by the dust and by the wilt. The dead are equal eventually, but before then it helps to have people who remember you. The lantern appeared on an afternoon in late September, the year before last. I say appeared because I don't remember anyone placing it. You notice when something new arrives. People come with their arms full around All Saints' Day, but in late September the cemetery is quiet. I had just finished trimming the hedges along the northern path and was sweeping when I saw a glow in the corner near the wall we share with the car park. It was a dim yellow, the kind that makes you think a candle is on its last inch. But when I went closer, the flame stood high, steady in a red plastic shelter with a white cap, the kind you buy for 5 zloty at any kiosk. It sat at the foot of a cracked stone whose letters had almost melted off. The surname was there, long and crooked, but shallow like a long breath on glass. The dates had been swallowed by time and lichen, no flowers, no wreath, just the lantern. If you've never been in a Polish cemetery at dusk, you don't know how even a single light changes the place. We are a country of candles. In November, the cemetery becomes a small city of fire. In August, it's less, only the faithful and the anniversaries. But a single light in September has the way of drawing your eyes and asking, quietly, who remembered. I checked the register in the office to see who was in that plot. Anya didn't look up from her ledger. Section 5, row 3, place 9, she asked. I nodded. She turned a sheet and ran a nail down the list. Family name Winiecki. Old, she said. No one has paid for upkeep in at least 20 years. Before my time. She lifted her eyes. Why? Someone lit a lantern, I said. Maybe someone moved back. She shrugged. Or a neighbor remembered. It's not a crime. It wasn't a crime. I didn't think it was anything. I straightened it the way I straightened all lanterns, scraped the moss off the edge of the stone out of habit, and went back to my broom. That night a storm came through. If you live here, you'll remember it. The tram line shut down at Dajwar, branches in the road, bins turned on their sides like turtles. The wind in a cemetery is worse because it can't find purchase. It spins, hits stone, slides up and down the etched names. Rain filled the little saucers in front of Our Lady's statue. I tightened my coat and walked the perimeter twice to make sure the gate stayed latched, then retreated into the shed and listened to the roof rattle. In the morning I expected the usual. A field of damp, knocked-over lanterns, wicks drowning in their own wax. But when I stepped onto the path, the first thing I saw was that one red lantern near the wall. The flame was high and strong. The rain on the cap made a thin ring of silver, but inside the fire flew as if the plastic itself were food. I leaned over expecting to see one of those new battery candles with the fake flame, but the cap was open enough to smell real paraffin. I tapped the plastic, and the flame jerked but did not die. I cupped my hand over the holes to see if wind was sneaking in and making it dance. No, the wick was long and the fuel was plentiful. Some lanterns are just well made. I told myself that and kept moving. It's important to set your mind early in a day like this. If you begin as a man who notices one odd flame out of 100 and stands there thinking about it, you will end the day a man counting clouds. The next day it still burned. The day after that, the plastic cap had a line of smoke across the inside where the heat had kissed it. It should have gone black. It didn't. I thought about switching it off at the office, the way you turn off a preserve of memory and make room for new things, but there was no switch. It was real. When I opened it to trim the wick, the flame snapped at my fingers and I laughed out loud like an idiot in an empty place. Laughing in the cemetery is strange. Your voice doesn't know where to bounce. On the 4th day, I asked Anya again. Winiecki, I said, do you have any contact number, relatives? She flipped through. No. Here. There is a note from 98 that the last payment came from a woman in Noisant. Name smudged. She peered closer. Could be Violetta. Could be Władysława. Why? The lantern, I said. It keeps burning. She smiled. You know how the older women do it. They save the good ones for when they need to last. Maybe she put a big one. Maybe, I said. But no one came to put it. You can't watch every minute, she said, and that was true. If you're worried about plastic, change it for a glass one. We have spares in the shed. Less chance of fire. That afternoon I did that, because she was right. I took a brown glass lantern with metal cap from the shelf, took the red plastic one off the stone and replaced it. The wick in the red one was blackened but long, and the paraffin was still half full even after days of wind. I felt silly handling it like a bomb. I set it in the shed on the workbench, opened the door wide so the smell wouldn't collect, and went back out. By closing time, the brown glass lantern burned exactly the same way the red one had. Steady, a little high. I told myself I had chosen a good wick. The mind will grab any stick that floats. 2 days later, the brown one was still going. An old man who brings bread to his wife stopped near it and crossed himself. I remember that one, he said, suddenly startling me. Not the lantern, the name. He bent and squinted at the faded surname. My father knew a Winiecki who worked on the trams. He fell under the wheels. My father said he should have been buried in Rakowicki with the others, but there was trouble with papers. He patted my arm. We all have trouble with papers, he said, and shuffled away. I know you think this is building to a fire, or to me opening the lantern and finding a live bird, or a little trick. It isn't. The trick, if there is one, is slower. Every day I noticed the flame. It was like something in the corner of your eye at the edge of sleep. You can pretend a long time that you aren't noticing. People came and went. Leaves began to fall in the way they do here, large and wet as hands. I kept the paths clean. I picked up empty plastic that blew in from the car park. I helped a grieving family find a grave that their aunt remembered only as near the White Angel, but not the broken one. I avoided the corner as long as I could each morning, then would pass it and feel the part of me that wanted to nod at it the way you nod at a guard on duty. He's there, the line holds. On the 10th day it rained again, hard. The flame burned unchanged. I know how lanterns work. If you protect a wick from wind and give it fuel, it will do what it's born to do. But I also know the feeling of wet that enters everything in this city. The way cold simply holds your hands even when they're inside gloves. I held my hand near the metal cap to check if heat was escaping. Of course it was hot, but it wasn't hot like I expected. No warm halo, no lip-stinging ring in the air. The heat seemed to run straight up, like smoke from a small chimney that ignores the room it's in. I brought it up with Father Tomasz because I talked to him about anything that sticks in my head. It is a nice thing, he said, mild. A persistent candle. Maybe you need such persistence, Piotr. You're still saving to move your mother to live with you, yes? I didn't tell him my mother and I weren't really speaking in those months. It's complicated. People find it more palatable if the person with the cemetery job is a dutiful son. The next morning, the glass lantern was ash dust at the foot of the stone. Not broken, melted in a way I've never seen glass melt. It looked like sugar that had met water. The metal cap lay on its side, dull and bent. In its place was the red plastic lantern from the shed. Lit, flame tall and clean under the white cap, just where I had first seen it. I stood there a long time and then I did something I regret. Not because it was wrong, but because of what it started. I picked up the red lantern, carried it to the tool shed and set it on the bench again. The flame didn't so much as darken. I tried to blow through one of the side holes. It fought me, a mouth breathing back. I took one of our old snuffers, a brass cup on a stick, a leftover from when churchmen came around to collect metal for useless wars, and I placed it over the cap. Flames die under cups. It's what cups are for. I held the cup there for 20 seconds until my fingers were hot. When I lifted it, the flame was still there, smaller for a heartbeat, then rising like a breath drawn after swimming. Fine, I said to no one, to myself. I took a pair of pliers and popped the white cap off. The heat should have made it soft. It had not. It gave with a little clean snap. The wick was black thread in a pool of pale paraffin. I pinched the wick between my wet fingers and the fire kissed my skin. I jerked more from surprise than pain, and my wet fingers smelled like hot dust. Not burnt, not blistered. I stepped back and laughed again, a sound that was getting too familiar in my own throat. When I put the cap back on, the flame settled down like a dog that has been told to wait. I left it in the shed and went to lunch. This is how petty the world remains while your head starts to slip. We are always thinking about soup and bread. After lunch, I expected to find the shed warmer, as if the lantern were a small stove. It wasn't. The flame burned as before, but if you closed the shed door, the air was actually colder than outside. I felt it in my teeth. My breath came visible. It was the end of September. It shouldn't have. The radio I never turned on had a little fog on its plastic face. The light from the door looked dirty, as if it had passed through water on the way in. I carried the lantern back to the stone like a man returning a borrowed tool, half angry and half ashamed. I have limits. I set it down, and because I wanted the universe to know I wasn't afraid, I said out loud, "Enough." The word sounded silly. Words do when you're speaking to nothing. That evening I locked the gate late as the last old woman with a scarf made her slow way out. She paused near the corner. A stubborn one, she muttered, I thought to herself. But as I passed, she looked up and locked eyes with me. Better to let some things burn, she said. Better to let some things burn out. Her eyes were pale like water. She kept walking without waiting for me to respond. I slept badly and dreamed of the tram. When I opened my eyes, it was still dark. It took me a moment to realize I was awake because in the dream I had also been sitting in the shed. I got dressed and went in early before dawn. Because if something is wrong, you either delay and give it more room to grow, or you go and stand next to it. I have never been good at delaying. The cemetery before sunrise is not the same place as after. The city noise is far, as if Krakow has slid an extra kilometer away in the night. The air is more honest. You hear what's actually here. The scrape of your boots on gravel, the soft clink of chain against gate, the faint ticking of cooling metal. Our old trash bins always tick if they were in the sun. The day before, and sometimes a soft sound, like a hair being drawn through a ring, wind, along the edges of a certain angel's wings. As soon as I turned into Section 5, I saw the lantern's glow. I don't know how light has a shape, but this one did, and I knew it now. It isn't like a candle in a window. It's like a little gold eye halfway open. I went to it with a stupid kind of relief, as if seeing it would mean the world was understandable again. And then relief turned to something else. The lantern was there, the red plastic bright against the gray flame high as always. But laid next to it, propped against the stone, was a lighter. Clear, cheap, with a metal top. The kind you buy at a kiosk. It was mangled, melted in parts. The plastic caved in and bubbled. You could see the fuel like a fossil. The little striker wheel was intact but stuck with a smear of soot that looked like thumbprint. On top of the lighter was a scrap of paper, brown on one edge. I do not know if it had been burnt then or burned and cooled or simply old and stained. It was scored across by a crease, as if it had been folded small and hid a long time. There was writing on it in pencil. Only a single word. My last name. You do not expect to see your own name in pencil on a wrinkled scrap next to a grave in a place where your job is to keep your own mind quiet. I picked up the paper. The pencil had pressed hard into the fibers. I could feel the rut under my finger. The handwriting was like my uncle's, crammed up and tall. I stared at it too long and then did the thing you do when you think someone is playing a joke. I turned, I looked between the stones. I scanned the fence top, expecting to see boys peeking over. A phone camera. I walked a small circle. The air had that same fogged teeth feeling as the shed had had. I tucked the scrap into my pocket without thinking and picked up the lighter. It was warm, not burn you warm, but the warmth of a coin that has been in a closed hand a long time. I took everything to the office. Anya arrived shortly after and found me at her desk with the ledger open to the Winiecki entry. I must have looked wrong because she put her bag down soft and said, "Piotr?" I showed her the scrap and the lighter without speaking. She read my name and raised her eyebrows, then looked at me with the face of someone deciding whether humor will help. She chose no. "I will call father," she said. "Anne Merrick, please sit. We are practical people and this is a small parish. Things become chores and chores get done. That's how we survive. Marek arrived with a pry bar and said, "If some idiot is burying lighters under our stones, I'm going to show him how to put his hands to better use." Father came with a battery lantern and a small wooden box he uses for the holy water and chalk. He didn't take them out. He looked first at me, then at the lighter, then at the ledger, and finally, with a long, slow breath, "At the corner where the red lantern burned, I think," he said after a moment, "that we should remove the lantern." "Finally," Marek said. "It's ugly." "It's normal," I heard myself say. "They're everywhere." "We will remove it," Father said again, as if deciding, and that was that. We walked to the stone. It's strange how many steps can fit into 20 meters when something is wrong. The lantern burned the way it always had. The flame leaned slightly as if listening. Father crossed himself, and I did too. Marek didn't. He put a hand around the top, hissed a little, the plastic was hot, and pulled it up. It left a ring of soot on the stone like a saint's halo. He held it away from his body, and we retraced our steps. 3 men walking a red dot to the shed like a surgery team moving a piece of something fragile. Inside the shed, Father took the wooden box out and set it on the bench next to the lantern. He opened it and took out a small bottle of water and a branch of boxwood, and said the blessing he says at funerals when I am too far away to hear all the words. He sprinkled water on the lantern and then, without any show, lifted the cap. He pinched the wick like I had. His fingers didn't flinch. The flame went down for a second and then flared back up. He closed the cap. He looked at me. His face had moved away from me without moving. He was not looking at me the way he looks at parishioners. He was looking at me like it was my job to know how to turn off taps and kill weeds and to turn off now this. I took the lantern, turned it upside down, and held it over the metal bin we use for dead flowers. The wick dipped under the fuel and went out, the way any wick will when starved of air. The smell of paraffin moved into the room like a cold. I waited 10 seconds, 20. I set the lantern upright. The flame reappeared at once, clean and high, as if something had simply held its breath. Marek swore, and I don't blame him. Father looked at the little flame as if it were a stubborn child in a confessional. Then he did something that surprised me. He put his finger into the lantern through one of the side holes. He didn't touch the flame. He touched the air. He held his finger there and then withdrew it. "It is cold," he said quietly. "It is very cold inside." "I told you," I said, and I hadn't told him that, not in words, but I had been trying to. He nodded without looking at me. "Fine," Marek said finally. "We bury it. You can't burn in the ground." He took the pry bar and went to the plot. He levered up the stone. It's not a heavy marker. Time makes even granite feel like plywood. Underneath was the usual bed of damp soil. No cement, no coffin this close to the surface. We keep the top layers loose to settle and to feed grass. There was a flattened space in the soil the size of a book. I don't know why that scared me more than if I had seen bones. It was like seeing a missing tooth in a mouth that had smiled at you yesterday. Marek scraped his boot heel in the dirt and found nothing but worms. "All right," he said. "Give me the stupid thing." He took the red lantern in his bare hands and set it in the depression, then kicked soil over it like he was putting out a cigarette. Father didn't say anything. I didn't either. We all have roles, and sometimes your role is to watch. We weighted the soil with the flat stone again. The ring of soot looked darker now. It felt like a bruise that would never quite go away. We stood for a minute, 3 men looking at a repaired square of earth. "Good," Marek said finally. "There." He clapped his hands once as if dusting them and went off to the truck to get lime to spread where the grass thins. Father put his hand on my shoulder. "You look pale," he said. "Go have tea." He hesitated and then added, "If anything else seems wrong, tell me. Tomorrow we should talk to the diocese about transferring the plot." "Transferring it to who?" I asked because I needed a normal question in my mouth. "To the parish," he said. "If there are no relatives," I nodded. He squeezed my shoulder and went away, his black coat making him part of the shadow until the angle of the path shifted, and he became a man again. I stood alone at the stone. I put my hand on the top and felt the place where the soot ring kissed the granite, as if it had written something there. I don't know why I pressed my hand flat. Maybe I wanted to feel a tremor, a small warmth, some sign that we had contained a thing, that the line between above and below still meant something. The granite was cold and just slightly damp, exactly like a stone that has sat quiet for decades should be. I went back to the shed. The scrap with my name on it was still in my pocket. I took it out and unfolded it again as if the paper might have changed while I wasn't looking. The pencil marks had a shine. I set it on the bench and stared until my eyes watered. When I blinked, letters floated in after image on the wall. I felt foolish and I felt watched. At closing time, the old man with the sandwich came by. He did his routine and came to find me, as he often does, to make a small joke about his cholesterol. "You were tired today," he said instead. I nodded. He looked past me into the shed at the bench at nothing. "I remember that name," he said. And I do not know if he meant the name on the paper or the name on the faint stone. "We all come back to our names," he said, and he shuffled away. That night I dreamed again of the tram. Not of riding it, but of standing on the tracks in the depot, wheels humming. In the dream I was holding a lantern. When the tram came, the driver didn't see me. I held up the light, and the driver's face was my uncle's face. Not the uncle I liked, the other one, the one who drank, whose name was also Pyotr. When I woke up, my room smelled like paraffin. I came in early again the next day with no plan except to not be alone with the thought. If your mind is a room, it's better to open a window and let the cold come in than to stay in the air you've warmed with your breath. The cemetery was gray. A light fog lay over the grass, the kind that happens when the river decides to be more part of the city than usual. I glanced toward Section 5 and felt a physical wave of relief. It was dark, no small gold eye, just stones and the wet sheen of morning. I went to unlock the shed. The door stuck, which it never does, and when I shouldered into it, the chill hit me first. Not the outside kind, the sweet early cold we get here, but the shed kind, the water and teeth kind. The workbench, the radio, the rake handles stacked on the wall, they were all rimed with a thin film like someone had breathed on them before dawn. The red lantern sat exactly where we had left it under the soil in the cemetery, except we hadn't left it there. The mind protests even as it lists facts. It sat on the bench, flame burning high and calm. Underneath it, the bench top was black. Not charred, black the way the stone had made a ring, as if soot could bloom like a flower through wood. There was a small circle of damp around the base. The air above the flame was cold. In front of it, centered like a student placing a homework assignment just so, lay a folded paper. I knew what it would say, and I picked it up anyway. I know how old men look when they are crying without letting tears reach their eyes. I see them every week. The paper said my surname again. The handwriting was thicker, and the pencil had torn the paper in a tiny place where the last letter arched. I didn't tell anyone that part. It is the only thing I have not told. I folded the paper and slid it into my wallet behind a photo of my mother that she hates. There are some things you keep near you so that if they understand anything human, they will understand that you saw them and that you are not an empty hallway. I took the lantern and I walked. In daylight now, through the cemetery, out the gate, across the small car park and into the street. People looked at me the way they look at men who are carrying something that might be too heavy. I walked to the footbridge over the tram lines, the one that rattles when a number 52 goes under it. I waited. When the tram passed, I held the lantern over the rail and opened my fingers. I know what you want. You want it to fall and shatter and send a bloom of paraffin fire along the tracks like a small dragon. You want the wheels to crush the cap and for me to later find it again, intact in the shed. That is not what happened. It didn't fall. It didn't stick either. My fingers opened and the weight remained in my hand exactly as if the rail were not there, as if my body had chosen a rule that gravity did not know. I closed my fingers. People bumped me from behind and cursed me for blocking the stairs. I went back down and I carried the lantern home like an idiot carrying a child he has no right to. My apartment smelled like paraffin for a week. The last thing I did, which is not an ending, but I don't have one to give you, was stupid. It was also inevitable. I took the lighter back to the cemetery and the scrap with my name, and I went to Section 5. I lifted the little stone by myself. It isn't heavy if you place your hands right. I dug with my hands, scooping out the damp topsoil until my knuckles were black. I wanted to put the lighter there. If the world was making a small pile of objects in a place, then I would add to the pile with the one thing that had arrived in my life that didn't fit anywhere else. I placed the lighter in the dirt. I pressed the paper next to it. The paper felt warm, from my wallet or from itself, I don't know. When my fingers were in the earth, I touched something smooth. Not wood, not stone, plastic. The shape my hand knew now. I closed my hand around it and I pulled up the red lantern. It came out of the soil like a potato. The flame burned perfectly. There was no soot on the chimney, no dirt on the cap. I stood, my knees muddy, and I set it on the stone, then put the lighter and paper back in the hole and covered them. I leveled the soil and replaced the stone. The lantern burned. A woman walking past with chrysanthemums at her elbow nodded. "For him," she said, and I didn't ask who she meant. I left it there. That is the only thing that changed. I stopped moving it, and I stopped trying to put it away. I straighten it when I straighten the others. If it goes askew, I adjust it with the same careful nothing face. I don't speak to it. I don't speak about it to Father or to Anya or to Marek. They don't either. When Marek sees it, he spits to the side, not at it, but near enough to suggest he could if he wanted to. Father walks a different path. Anya keeps 2 extra packs of long matches in the drawer by the door now, as if matches can help anything. Sometimes when I walk past, I put my hand near the cap to feel the cold. It helps me know something has not changed. On winter mornings when my breath shows in front of me, I hold my hand above that little flame and I feel nothing. And the nothing is solid in a way I can lean on. Once in a while, less now, but not never. I find a scrap of paper on the bench when I unlock the shed, or in the pocket of my coat when I know I would never keep paper there, or on the lip of the stone near the soot ring. It always has my name. The letters are different sometimes, shorter or wider, like different hands wrote it, although the pressure is the same. I keep them all in my wallet like a fool. I tell myself that paper is paper and names are names, and the world is full of both. Enough to make coincidences every day if you wanted. There is one more thing. I don't like to think about it because it feels like an invitation. But if I'm telling this, I might as well tell it. Last week I went to the library near Krowodra to look at the old municipal lists. It isn't hard. You fill the form, you show your ID, you sit under the librarian's dry gaze and you turn pages of names. In the tram worker's log from 1963, there was a note next to a Piotr Winiecki about an accident that happened on a wet Tuesday. He had a wife who wrote to the parish that his grave should be kept if possible. The address on the letter was my street, but the number was wrong. Maybe the numbers changed. Maybe I saw what I wanted. Maybe I leaned into the page until I could smell old pencil and told myself that smell meant truth. I closed the book. The librarian looked up as if I had coughed even though I hadn't. I walked home past the tracks. The bridge rattled. I had left the lantern at the cemetery like a man who has finally decided to stop carrying something he was never meant to carry. The air was ordinary and harmless. I felt ordinary and harmless in it. But later, in the shed, when I reached for the rake, my hand brushed a smooth cylinder tucked behind the bench leg, and I knew before I pulled it out what color it would be and how high the flame would stand and how cold the air above it would feel. If you come, please don't bring one of your own. We have enough. If you see a small red light in the corner near the wall, walk past it the way you walk past any person seated alone on a bench at dusk, without looking too long, without letting your hands hang open. Pray if you pray. Keep your names where you keep them. And if a scrap slips under your door on a damp morning, if it bears your last name in a slashed pencil hand, fold it once and put it somewhere you can feel it touch the skin when you move. Don't throw it away. Throwing away something with your name on it never did anyone in this city any good. I'm not much of a storyteller, but I don't know who else to tell this to. My name is Andre. I dig graves for the municipal cemetery up on the hill in Sibiu, the old hill behind the war memorial, where the wind runs like a second river through the pines and the city lights drift up at night like a soft orange fog. I started the job 6 years ago when my brother-in-law Soren put in a recommendation. He's older than me by 10 years and used to be my shift partner until his back went bad this spring. I'm 35, single, the kind of guy who knows where the good shovels are kept and what brand of bleach actually gets soil out of nails. That's who I am. I'm not religious, not superstitious. I like my coffee the way the old women at the market make it. Burned, thick, sweet. I don't scare easily, or at least I didn't. Not before last winter. Our cemetery is layered like a cake the city forgot to finish. There's the new section near the lane where families drive in with cut flowers and electric candles. There's the middle where the stones lean and the names are half chewed by weather. And there's the old, really old section by the war memorial, where the soil turns up buttons and brass sometimes, where the dates run together and the photographs in the little oval frames have turned into gray shadows with white eyes. The memorial itself is a tall stone obelisk with an iron fence and a list of names from the wars. People go there on holidays, bring wreaths, take pictures, post them with sad captions. The rest of the year, it's just me and the stray dogs who sleep under the benches. My shift is weird because there's no regular grave digger schedule. It depends on when the funeral is. Winter is quiet, the ground harder, fewer burials. A good chunk of those months I'm doing maintenance, clearing branches, leveling stones that tilt, bleaching the mold off the angel statues, and some nights, guarding the grounds when there's been vandalism. That's how this started. The city had a problem with kids drinking up near the memorial, smashing bottles, painting rude things on the pedestal. The police did a few drive-bys and that calmed it down, but I was still supposed to walk the perimeter every night and call if I saw anything. It wasn't bad. I liked being up there after midnight. The city felt like it belonged to me then. The first time I saw him was in early January, when the sky was like a low metal lid and the snow squeaked under my boots. I carry an old Nokia because it doesn't die in the cold. And I remember looking at the time because I'd just finished the lower section and was heading up the steps to the memorial. 3:12 a.m. The number stuck because it looked like someone counting down 312. I remember thinking that as my breath made long white ropes in the air. He was standing in front of the memorial, hands behind his back, shoulders squared, facing the town, exactly like the bronze soldier on the pedestal except in reverse. Like the statue had stepped down and swapped places. He wore a long, dark coat that hung straight and a cap like a military cap flat on top. From where I was, about 20 meters away, I could see the line of his profile against the sky and the sharp angle of his chin. He didn't move at all. I thought, okay, someone's doing a late-night salute, maybe a drunk paying respect, maybe a tourist with bad jet lag. I called out, "Buonasera." My voice felt too loud. He didn't answer, didn't even turn. I walked closer. The snow there is shallow, broken by old ice and patches of dead grass. The iron fence around the memorial was locked, as always, chain and padlock through the gate. The man was on the outside of the fence, not inside. I could see that now. He was still, so still I had the sudden thought that maybe he was ill. Maybe he'd frozen standing up, which made no sense, but there it was. I was 10 meters away when he finally turned his head a fraction, as if someone had called his name from the city below. Then, this is the part I have replayed 100 times, then something in me went cold and I stopped. I don't know why. It wasn't fear exactly. It was like the moment you step into a church and remember you're supposed to be quiet. I stood there feeling the wind touch the sweat under my hat. "Sir?" I said softer. "It's late. Can I help you get home?" He didn't respond. He didn't walk away. He just wasn't there anymore. I don't have a better word for it. I blinked and my eyes watered from the wind and the place he had been was empty. Unbroken snow and my own footprints. I looked down at the ground to see if I had missed something. And that's when I saw the boot prints. They were right in front of me, sharp and fresh in the powder. Deep heel, squared toe, a tread pattern like crossed lines. Not the thick rubber of a hiking boot and not the flat sole of a dress shoe. Military, my brain supplied without asking me. The prints ran from the stone steps up to where he had stood, then turned and went along the outer edge of the fence, then down, curving to the right. I followed them, feeling stupid and afraid at the same time, like I had lost a child in a crowd. The prints led away from the memorial and into the old section. I kept expecting to see him again behind a tree or beside a headstone. The night made a sound like breathing, just the wind in the pines, but once you think of it that way, you can't unthink it. The footprints went past the line of photographs with their blank eyes, around the row with the rusted iron crosses, and stopped at a grave I knew by sight but not by name. The stone is red granite and low, with a small iron star bolted on the top. There's a surname chiseled into the front, Dumitrescu, and a first name, Adrian, and a set of dates, 1918-1944. The letters are crisp because a local veterans group paid to restore some of these stones a few years back. I know that because Soren and I helped reset the star, which used to wobble when you touched it. The boot prints stopped at the foot of the grave and overlapped themselves, as if the person had stood there and shifted his weight once, then stepped closer to the headstone. Then the prints softened and the snow looked stirred, and then there was nothing, just the smooth, untouched blanket between the stone and the path. No prints leading away, no prints going back. I walked a circle around the plot. It wasn't big, 2 steps by 1 step. The snow on the far side looked exactly like all the other snow. I crouched and pressed a finger into it. Fresh, fine, dry. No melt, no crust broken. I walked a wider circle, then wider, my breath catching. Nothing. The boot prints came to Adrian Dumitrescu and they ended there like a sentence. I stayed out until 4:30 with my flashlight. And then I went down to the caretaker's office, locked the doors, put on the kettle, and sat looking at the wall while the noise of the old radiator thumped in the way it always does when it's thinking about dying. The water boiled dry. I can tell you I tried to come up with an explanation. Somebody walking his dog, some kid with vintage boots, drunken panic exaggerating simple things. I told myself all that until the clock on the wall clicked to 6 and the sky started to pale. Then I went home and slept on the couch with the TV on so the silence couldn't find me. The next night I told myself I'd do the rounds earlier, before 2, get it over with. I did. I walked the lower section. I stood at the steps and looked up and there was nobody. I checked the locks on the tool shed. I drank coffee so strong it tasted like burnt coins. I sat at the desk and scrolled old soccer highlights and felt the shameful relief of a reprieve. At 3, I told myself I was being childish. At 3:10, I put on my coat and hat. At 3:12, I stood on the steps and there he was again. Same place. Same posture. The wind had shifted south that night, gentler, carrying the smell of smoke from the chimneys in the city below. He was sharp against the sky. Not a shadow, but a person with weight, with silence around him the way large stones have. I watched him without moving and felt that same feeling I'd had before. The church silence. The count in my pocket flicked to 3:13 and he turned his head again. Just a fraction. And I felt the hair move on my arms, even under the layers. I didn't call out this time. I walked forward until the fence was between us and watched him across the bars like I was visiting someone dangerous in a place with rules. I thought if I blinked he would be gone, so I didn't. My eyes burned. For a second the city below seemed to tilt, like we were on the deck of a ship and about to slide into the dark. He didn't look at me. He looked across me, past me, through me. I don't know. He wasn't angry. He wasn't anything. He was a fact. I blinked. He was gone. The snow told the rest. The boot prints weren't on the steps that night. They were along the path from the upper gate, tight even, not like a wandering drunk. They traced the outer edge of the memorial fence the same as before, and then they went down to Dumitrescu. They ended the same way, like he had stepped forward into the headstone and disappeared. I did a stupid thing then. I took my phone, turned on the flashlight, and snapped pictures. They looked like pictures of snow with ovals pressed into it. I know that, but I needed to have something to show Soren because I knew he was going to laugh at me. He came by the next day for coffee and cigarettes like he always does. His back hurts too much to work, but not too much to gossip. He looked at the photos, grunted, took another drag, and said, "The veterans' graves. People leave candles there. That's what you saw. At 3:12? I said like a child. Exactly at 3:12 both nights? Coincidence? He squinted at the screen. Boots like that may be the reenactors. They practice sometimes. On a weeknight? In January. But I didn't push it. Soren is the kind of guy who doesn't want his life to become a story. He stands with both feet in the dirt and calls it good. He patted my shoulder on the way out and said, "Stop taking your shifts so personally." I tried. For 5 nights in a row, I did the same thing. I told myself I wouldn't go up after 3. Then 3 would come and then 3:12. The first 2 nights he was there. The third night, heavy clouds smothered the hilltop, and there was a fine wet snow that erases everything. I stood in it until my eyebrows turned white and no one came. The 4th night he was there. The 5th night it was like he had never been. I started to think it was me, like I was making him by expecting him. On the 6th night I brought someone. It wasn't a bold plan. It was fear disguised as a social call. There's a cafe at the bottom of the hill, a little place where they know me by my coat and muddy boots. The owner is a woman named Elena who acts like everyone's aunt. She has sharp eyes and a tired laugh. I told her I was doing late rounds and asked if she wanted to drop off some pastries for the groundskeeper in the morning. She said, "I'll walk up with you now. I can leave them in the office. No one steals from the dead." She likes to say things like that. I didn't try to stop her. We walked the lane together with her paper bag rustling and the snow squeaking and the city quiet below. She asked about Soren's back and scolded me for not wearing better gloves. I waited until close to 3 to suggest we swing by the memorial to check the locks. Elena's family is the kind that lights candles and crosses themselves when ambulances go by, but she's practical too. The combination of both makes her brave. We were on the steps at 3:10. I felt like a diver standing at the edge of a dark pool. At 3:12, the church bells from the lower town tolled quietly, the way sound does when the air is heavy. He was there, exactly. Elena stopped talking mid-sentence and her voice stalled in the cold air like a car missing a gear. "Do you see him?" I asked, already knowing what the answer would be meant for me. She nodded once, very slowly, the paper bag crinkling as her hands tightened. "Don't call out," she whispered, and I realized I wouldn't have anyway. We watched him stand with his hands behind his back, looking at the town like a man who lost something down there and expects it to return if he waits long enough. He didn't move. Neither did we. When the bells faded, a stray dog barked twice and stopped. Elena breathed like a person in labor. Finally, her hand crept to my sleeve and closed, and in that exact second, I can't prove this, but it felt true, he turned his head toward us and not past us. Not through us, toward us. The look wasn't human, the way noticing is human. It was more like direction. As if we were the next thing on a list. We didn't run. We weren't that stupid, and also we were exactly that stupid, because running felt like it would invite pursuit. We backed down the steps together, and when I blinked, he was gone. The snowfall had stopped. The boot prints led away from the memorial the same as before. We followed them, because apparently I enjoy being the idiot in a horror film, and Elena wouldn't let me go alone. When we reached Dumitrescu's grave, Elena stopped 2 steps back, the paper bag pressed against her chest. The prints ended the same way, overlapped, weight shifting, then nothing. "The ground's not disturbed," she whispered. "No settling. If someone dug even a little, you'd see the sink." I know. We stood there until our toes hurt, as if by staying we could force the logic out of the night. We got nothing. On the way down, Elena said, as if she were talking about the weather, "My father used to come up here. He was born right at the end of the war. He knew the names on that stone. He always said, 'Never stand in front of it with your back to the city at night.' He said that is how they count you." "How who counts you?" She shrugged like the question didn't matter to the answer. "I'll ask him what he meant." She didn't, or if she did, she never told me. Maybe she decided some information doesn't change what you still have to do at 3:12. I tried another kind of help after that. On the 8th night, I called Father Petru, who keeps a spare key to the chapel. He's younger than most priests I've known, and he jogs and he wears good boots. He came up with me around 2:30. The hood of his coat rhymed with breath. We walked to the memorial. He asked the usual practical questions. Had anyone been seen breaking in? Did I notice the time in any particular way before this started? He asked gently, like he didn't want to step on a sore place. I told him the truth, which sounded like a lie, which is the trouble with the truth. At 3:12, we were both looking at the exact same thing. The priest made a small sound, not a prayer word, more like an acknowledgement. He didn't raise his hand or cross himself. He just watched like I did, like Elena had, helpless and thoughtful. After a minute, he said, "We won't bother him." When the man on the hill went away, Petru and I followed the prince down to Dumitrescu. The priest crouched and touched the snow with his bare fingers and flinched, as if it burned. "Sometimes," he said, not looking at me, "when a story is too big to show itself in the day, it picks 1 minute at night and does its work then." He stood and wiped his fingers on his coat. "If I were you, I'd bring a second man on your rounds, not because this is evil, but because you'll doubt yourself if you go alone too long." "Is this?" I started and couldn't finish the question because I didn't know how to name it without naming myself a fool. "It's a visit," he said, "to a grave that remembers." That night I slept 8 straight hours and dreamed about nothing, which is what relief feels like when it shows up disguised as fatigue. You'd think the story ends there, with me having witnesses and a priest's opinion and a quaint superstition to carry in my pocket like a folded icon. It doesn't. If it had, I would have kept it to myself. The reason I'm writing is because I did the one thing I swore not to do. I interrupted. It was late February. The sky had the kind of hard brightness that makes you think spring might be real. The snow was pitted, dirty at the edges. Soren called to say his back was better and he wanted to take a night walk, see the place he missed. I didn't want him up there, but I didn't know how to say that without admitting why. We walked the rounds, told jokes with easy laughter because fear hates that. And at 3:12 we were on the steps, me pretending to be surprised, Soren pretending not to be. "Your friend," he said, squinting. "He stands like my grandfather." It sounded like mockery, but there was a hitch in it that wasn't. We watched without speaking. Then Soren did 2 things almost at once. He took a step forward as if to get a better look, and he raised his hand in a small salute. 2 fingers to the brim of his cap the way old men do in the market when they see the police. It was respectful. It was sincere. It was apparently an invitation. The man on the hill turned his head all the way, more than a fraction, enough for the line of his jaw to become a face-shaped absence against the sky. He looked at Soren, and the feeling that moved through me was not a church silence but the blunt, stupid fear of slipping on ice with both arms full. Soren's hand fell. He whispered, "Do you feel that?" And I knew he meant it physically, like a drop in air pressure. The man did not move. But the prince that had not existed yet did. I don't know how else to say it. We watched the snow in front of the memorial open with clean, sharp ovals, one after another, coming down the steps toward us with even measured pace. No body made them. No legs moved in them. They just happened, as if a mold pressed into the world from underneath. Soren grabbed my sleeve so hard the seam popped. We backed away together as the prince came on, stopping where we had stood a second before, then turning with exquisite precision and heading in a line along the fence, down the path. We followed at a distance we didn't measure but understood, and it was like following a fuse. At Dumitrescu's grave, the prints overlapped themselves, weight shifting. But this time, instead of ending like breath on a mirror, they turned and kept going around the grave behind it, to the side where the soil settles and rises with the seasons. The prints stopped there. Then 2 more appeared, toes pointing at the seam between stone and ground. Then nothing. Soren said very softly, as if he feared to disturb a sleeping animal, "Don't. I'm not." He meant me opening my mouth. He meant me calling out. He meant anything at all. We stood until the feeling that had descended on us eased a fraction, like a hand lifting from the back of your neck. When we finally went back to the office, I made tea. We didn't drink, and we both pretended to be annoyed by how cold it had gotten. We didn't talk about it again. We didn't have to. Some experiences are like teeth. They fit your skull whether you want them to or not. 2 nights later, everything tilted. There was a burial scheduled for the veterans section. An old man, 92, one of the last who wore his uniform too tightly at parades. His granddaughter came up to arrange the details and asked if we could place him in the row near the memorial, with his friends. He had outlived most of his friends, but the veterans group had their list and permissions, and the city said yes. I measured the plot in the afternoon, marked it with twine and paint. It was 2 rows down from Dumitrescu. I checked the old records to make sure we weren't going to clip any forgotten corners. The record book for that section is a miracle of careful handwriting and water stains. I ran my finger down the column of names and dates and stopped at one that didn't match the stone. The book said 1918-1943. The stone said 1918-1944. I told myself restoration mistakes happen. I made a note to ask the veterans group where they got their dates. I closed the book and went to sharpen my spade. I started digging at dusk when the ground loosens just enough to pretend it wants to cooperate. The soil there is different from the new section. It's sandy and red, and sometimes it gives you back little artifacts. The edge of a crushed tin, a bead of glass, a rusted nail. I set the boards, measured the depth, tried not to think about the faces. At midnight, I was sweating under my coat, and the stars were so clear they felt like holes punched in a lid. I took a break, drank water, checked my phone. Elena had texted me a photograph of her cat under a blanket, like a ghost with a shriveled little paw. I smiled. It's important to tell the small truth of that. I went back to the grave and put my shovel in and hit wood. We don't hit wood in new ground. That's the point of records and maps and careful measuring. I froze, one hand on the handle, listening to the different sound the shovel made now that the earth knew a secret. I cleared around the spot with the squared-off spade, and my gloves felt too thick and too thin at the same time. There was a length of something like a plank, about the width of a hand, running exactly where the new grave would be. On the side, pressed into the grain, was a mark like a star. I got the little brush we use for stones and swept until the shape resolved into something like a small iron plate that had been hammered into wood and rusted there. I could make out letters under the rust. I rubbed them gently. The letters were AD. I don't know how long I crouched there before my knees reminded me I am a body that obeys gravity. I stood up too fast, stars popped in my vision, and when I steadied, I realized I had been digging exactly along the edge of Dumitrescu's plot, but a little low, as if the earth had slumped and taken the map with it. The plank, I know the name, it's a ledger board, they use them sometimes. Was a piece of the old coffin lid or something placed above it when they stacked graves in hard times. It didn't matter. The point was that I had disturbed a seam that should have stayed invisible. I covered the exposed wood with a board and plastic, the way we do to keep rain out, and I went to the office to call the city. The line rang. No one answered. I left a message that said all the right words in all the right order, and none of them could put anything back where it belonged. At 3:12, I heard the first footstep, not in the snow. Not the hush of prints appearing. A footstep on wood, close enough that I knew exactly which board on the path had flexed. I stood in the doorway and looked up the lane toward the memorial. The night was clear, the hill a skeleton of tree limbs and old stone. The man stood at the memorial the way he always stood, the way I had expected with dread and confused wanting for weeks. But what I hadn't expected was what I saw at the corner of my eye. Soren, halfway up the lane, his shoulders hunched, his hands jammed in his coat, walking too fast. "Soren," I called, but my voice was the wrong size for the world and broke. He didn't turn. He kept going, past me up the steps, stopping halfway like a man who realizes too late that he's forgotten why he came into a room. The man by the memorial turned his head clean and slow, and the air pressure changed again, the way it had when Soren saluted. "Don't," I said, which covered everything. It didn't cover enough. Soren wasn't looking at the memorial anymore. He was looking down the path that led to the grave I had opened. His face had the expression my mother's had the day she got the phone call about our father. A relieved dread. A knowing that finally had a destination. He walked toward Dumitrescu's plot like a man pulled by the sleeve. I ran after him, and my boots slipped and skidded, and every noise I made felt obscene in that calm. At the grave, the plastic I had laid down was still there, tight over the board, rimed with frost. Soren stood at the end of the plot with his toes on the line where the boot prints always overlapped. There were no boot prints that night. He didn't need them. He put his hand out and touched the stone. I swear to you it made a sound. Not like metal or wood, not like anything I can describe except the way a mouth might make a name for the first time in 80 years. Behind us at the memorial, the man moved. He didn't walk. The space between where he had been and the next place was just used up. He was at the edge of the stairs now, visible as a darker clarity against the stone and iron, and he was looking not at the city but down at us like we were two boys who had kicked a ball into a church. Soren said, "I had an uncle named Adrian. My mother never talked about him. You don't," I started and then stopped because all my sentences had gone wrong. The wind rose and the trees sounded like soldiers turning in their sleep. The plastic over the board lifted and fell in a small breath. Soren took a half step closer. The seam at the edge of the stone darkened as if a hand had touched it from below. I know how that sounds. It's what I saw. Something in me that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with being an animal took over. I grabbed Soren by the elbow and pulled. He didn't resist hard, but he resisted, and that felt like a betrayal I would have to live with later. I said his name the way you say it to a child on a train platform. He looked at me and there was water in his eyes, not tears, just the kind of water that happens when cold air and warm breath get tangled. "Okay," he said finally, and let me pull him back 2 steps. We stood there together, both breathing like we had run, and the plastic stopped moving and the pressure eased. Up at the memorial, the man turned his head back toward the city and the world found its size again. We filled the hole in the morning. That is a sentence that makes the thing sound small. It wasn't. The city came up, the veterans group, respectful men with serious faces. The granddaughter in a neat coat, her lips chapped by the cold. The priest. Elena with a flask of something that could have been coffee or courage. We lowered the old man into the new ground with the correct map, the correct records, careful hands. After the service, while people were brushing their palms and making the small talk grief needs, I walked quietly to Dumitrescu's grave. The snow there had melted to a thin crust. The seam around the stone was dry, clean, undisturbed. I set my hand on it and felt nothing but cold. That night I did my rounds like always. At 3:12 I went to the steps. The wind was from the north. The city was a soft orange fog again. The man was there, hands behind his back, face toward the town. Still, I watched him until my eyes watered and he was gone. I went down to Dumitrescu and saw the boot prints overlapped, weight shifting, and then nothing. What changed was not the pattern but the way it felt. There was no pressure, no drop, no sense that something was about to happen if I made the wrong sound. It felt like watching a train go by and not being the person it's meant to carry. It would be neat to end here, with the idea that whatever needed to be counted was counted, that the man on the hill is a ritual the night performs and we have learned not to interrupt. But the truth is that 2 weeks later at 3:12 there were 2 figures at the memorial. I saw them and I thought my body had finally learned to manufacture fear out of thin air. The first stood where he always stood, squared posture, cap, coat. The second stood to his left, a step back, hands also behind his back but not as straight. A little human slant in the shoulders. They didn't look at each other. They both looked at the city. I don't know if the second was ever there again. I didn't go up the following night. For 3 nights I let the hour pass and pretended to sleep. On the 4th night I went, because pretending is a story that always ends with someone standing up. At 3:12 there was just the one man again, the way it had been. I watched him. He watched the town. When he was gone, the boot prints led the way they always do. To the grave they have not opened in 80 years. They overlapped. They shifted. They ended. That's all I have. That and this. Sometimes when I'm in Elena's cafe and Soren comes in slow, careful with his back, Elena will pour him coffee without asking and set the cup down like a secret between them. Sometimes Soren will touch the rim with 2 fingers before he takes a sip, the way he saluted that night. And he'll look at me over the steam with an expression that says he is still learning which stories are his and which are the hills. If you ever visit Sibiu and climb the steps to the memorial, you won't see anything special in the daylight. It will be a nice view. The city will look like the inside of a candle lantern. You'll read the names if you read names, and you'll feel whatever you let yourself feel. But if you happen to be there at 3:12 a.m., if the cold fits your lungs, if the snow tells you where you aren't invited, don't stand with your back to the city. That's how they count you. And if you see a second man on the hill a half step behind, don't call out. Some stories don't like to be called by name. They prefer you to know them in silence and to walk away with your boot prints looking exactly like everyone else's until they don't. I got the job on San Michele because I don't mind quiet places. Some people get itchy when there's nothing but wind and water for company. I always liked it. The cemetery island sits between Venice and Murano like a low brick ship at anchor. You get off the Vaporetto, past the cypresses, and after a few minutes the city noise is a memory you can't prove. I've been a custodian there for 6 years, mostly early shifts. I open the side gates for maintenance crews, sweep paths, check for vandalism. There's not much trouble. Occasionally a glass tourist thinks the walls are pretty for Instagram and tries to climb. You yell, they hop down, they take the next boat back and forget all about it. That morning started like any other late autumn day. Low fog, the kind that comes in bands off the lagoon and wraps everything in damp. The ferry horn sounded different in that weather, flatter and closer. I clocked in at 5:45, beat the sunrise, and met Luca by the tool shed. He's older than me, 2 kids on the mainland, and he tempers his coffee with a splash from the bottle he keeps in his boot. He handed me my route sheet and pointed at a name someone had scribbled in pencil across the top. Zeed Albright, locate family vault, note condition. There were notes about a funeral inquiry. The surname didn't ring a bell. We did our first round together. The fog moved like it had weight. Every few paces a cypress dripped on my shoulder. The sea threw salt into the air that stuck to metal and made it bloom with rust if you let it. I had my gloves and a roll of red and white tape in my pocket, because we mark off any loose stones or broken corners until the mason can fix them. Routine. Around 7, when the first visitors usually show up, the office phone buzzed my pocket. It was Serena from Polizia Locale on the Riva degli Schiavoni. She sounded like she had already been awake for days. A tourist had fallen from a Vaporetto dock before dawn. British, mid-30s female. Witnesses said she slipped. Any family? I asked. A husband, she said. He's at the hospital, not in good shape. She told me the name so I could check if there was a family plot here. Zoe Albright, she said. The pencil on my sheet suddenly had weight too. I told Serena I'd look and call her back. Right then the 7:05 foghorn came through the weather. It's a big freighter's tone. Always a bit to the north. A single long call that seems to roll along the surface of the water. The horn faded. Then before the air settled, I heard a smaller sound. It was faint. I thought at first it was a phone alarm from across the water, or a bicycle bell on the fondamenta. But it came from behind the wall to my left inside the oldest section, a tinny quick ringing, 3 taps, then stillness. I don't jump at sounds. If you spend time among marble and wind, you hear all kinds of things you can't name. But this sound landed in a particular corner of my brain because when I was a kid, my nonna talked about safety bells. She called them campanelli di salvataggio. She was dramatic and liked old stories. Back in the day when people were afraid of burying someone alive, they ran a string up from the coffin to a bell at the surface. If anyone woke up underground, they could ring. I know that sounds medieval, and I don't know how often it actually happened here, but the image stuck. A pale hand fumbling in the dark and a little bell dancing at the edge of mist. Before you think I'm the kind of guy who hears ghosts in plumbing, let me explain the layout. The old city of the dead is where the earliest graves are. Brick family vaults with heavy iron doors, some with glass windows, some with stone lips for candles. The bells that still stand are decorative now. Nobody strings them to anything, but a few are there for history, fixed to arches, mute with corrosion. When that small ringing came, I turned my head before I could tell myself not to. Luca was already walking toward the new section with a leaf blower. I called to him and he waved me off. He's practical. If something isn't on the sheet, it can wait. I went the other direction, down a narrower path, cypresses on both sides, the gravel soft like felt from fog. 3 taps again, same rhythm. I followed it past the chapel and into the row that looks toward Murano. The fog was thinner there. I could see the silhouettes of the glass factories across the water. At the end of the row stood a family vault I don't remember noticing much before. Albright. The letters were English straight. No flourishes, set into white marble that once was white, now dulled. It wasn't one of the old Venetian names with angels everywhere. Just a rectangle with a small cross and a door like a safe. There was a little brass bell mounted to the frame, the kind a housekeeper might use in a hotel 100 years ago. The pull cord was gone. The bell was greasy with salt, and in the weak light I could see the line where the drop ran and dried again and again over the years. I stood there long enough to feel silly. The bell didn't move. There was no breeze. It felt like being in a room where someone just said your name and you missed it. I bent to check the threshold and saw the crack. It ran like a hairline from the lower right corner of the stone, across the carved family name to the edge near the bell mount. I touched it with my glove. The stone flakes that crumbled away were wet. Fresh wet, not the kind from fog. The salt on the surface smelled raw like you get near the water line. I pulled out the tape and marked the area, then took photos with my phone like we're supposed to. The last one I took included the bell by accident. There was a smudge of something on its lip like rust but more red. I wiped it with the thumb of my glove and the stain lifted watery and thin. I don't remember deciding to do it, but I knocked the bell with my knuckle. It made that same light sound like a spoon against thin glass. 3 taps felt right. I don't know why I did 3. I told myself to be normal, to log it and move on. On the way back, I took the route that passes the chapel because the caretaker's office is behind it. Don Paolo, the priest who says small services during the week, was just unlocking the side door. He's in his 50s and smiles with only one half of his face like the other half is saving energy. I told him about the crack. He walked out with me to see, holding his keys like a rosary. On the path he said, "Albright, English?" There's a musician with that name. Or maybe I'm thinking of something else. He talks like that, stray facts floating in. When we got back to the vault, he made the sign of the cross, which he does more often than you would think. He touched the crack and made a little sound like a dentist finding a cavity. "We should keep people away," he said. Maybe the salt got in behind the mortar. He was about to say more when the fairy horn sounded again, and almost at the same breath, the little bell gave 1 tap as if to answer a question nobody had asked. I didn't touch it. He didn't either. We both stood still, and if you saw us from above, you would think we were mannequins. The fog parted a little, then closed. It was nothing more than a movement of air, I told myself. Vibrations, metal on metal. We walked back toward the office without saying anything, and halfway there his phone buzzed. He stopped, read the message, and told me without looking up that there had been a death in the night. A tourist. "They're asking about burials," he said, "but likely the family will fly her home." I asked for the name. He said it. It was the same as my sheet. I called Serena like I promised and told her there was indeed an Albright vault, private, old. She said the husband had mentioned that his wife loved Venice. He'd rambled something about the island with the cypresses, how she had taken photos there 2 days before. There are no tours of San Michele, but people come and walk quietly, and if someone looks respectful, we don't shoo them away. Serena asked if she could send the husband over later to see the place. I told her we aren't a viewing room for grief, but I'd check with the office. She said he wouldn't make it today anyway. He was sedated. The day thickened. The fog burned off toward noon. We had a small committal service for an old man from Cannaregio. I watched a granddaughter touch her grandfather's name as if making sure it had the right temperature. The island never feels heavy until you watch fresh tears fall on old stone. Then the air goes strange. I swept the path in slow arcs and kept glancing north like I could see through the brick to that bell. You'll think I'm making this part up, but I swear this is how it went. Right after the 3 p.m. horn from a barge headed to the pass, I heard the bell again. 3 taps. I was halfway down another row. It's a flattering thing to be convinced that only you notice what's happening. I told myself to grab coffee, to let it go, to leave old metal to its noises. But I walked back. The tape I had put up in the morning dripped in a little loop. The humidity made it sag. The crack looked longer. It had climbed up through the letter B and started to veer toward the small glass lozenge set into the right side of the door, a peep window. Many vaults have them frosted, to let a bit of light in when candles burn inside. I leaned close and cupped my hands around the glass to cut the reflection. It wasn't clear, but through the frost I could see the dark shapes of the wooden shelves where caskets rest. And there was light in there. I frowned. We don't keep candles lit inside with no supervision. They're usually for services only. The glow was weak and yellow, bobbing like a flame starved of air. I was about to go back for the key box because family vault keys are kept on site for emergencies, when something knocked from inside. I'm not going to lace that into a metaphor. It was a knock, not a scrape or a creak. Wood on stone, dull and patient once, twice, then 3 times. I stood there with my mouth open like a child. I counted in my head. I told myself it could be a rat rustling. It could be a board settling. The bell above my head answered with 3 weak taps, the way a spoon answers a knock on a bowl. I called to Luca because even brave men hate to be alone when the world isn't behaving. He took his time coming because he has dignity to maintain, and if he'd seen me shaking, he would never stop bringing it up. When he arrived, he rolled his eyes and said, "It's an echo." Wind in the frame. Leave it. He bent to the glass and squinted but saw nothing. He grabbed the bell and wiggled it. It didn't ring. He knocked the door with his knuckles. "See?" he said. It boomed like a safe. He stepped back, shrugged, and told me to tape it better. Then I swear, right as he walked away and I breathed out, the bell tapped twice, quick like breath on metal. I didn't call him back. I didn't want to hear the joke he would make. I stood there and said out loud, "Okay." The word sounded thin. I went to the office and signed out the key. Each vault's key is tagged with a brittle paper number in an old drawer. I walked back with the key in my fist like a talisman. On the way, Don Paolo caught me and asked what I was doing. When I told him, he shook his head. "Better the mason looks first," he said. "There's liability." I told him about the candlelight. He watched my face for an extra beat. Then he came with me. We put on gloves because you feel braver when you do something in the correct order. I cut the tape and put the key into the iron lock. It turned like it hadn't turned in a long time. The smell that came out when I pulled the door a hand's width wasn't rot. Nothing dramatic, just old boards and cold wax. The light inside wasn't a candle. It was a little LED, one of those battery votives people leave. It flickered without heat. Someone had left it in the back corner and its reflection looked like flame through the frosted glass. I felt embarrassed for how my heart had sped, but not entirely relieved. We opened the door wide enough to step in. The space was no bigger than a closet. 2 shelves on each side, 1 empty. 3 with old, polished coffins, metal handles gone soft from time. In the back was a small niche with a photo frame and some artificial flowers. The LED sat there, pulse stuttering. On the right-hand shelf, a newer wooden box with English carved letters, Henry Albright. The date said 1958. That explained the name. A lot of families have some member who fell in love with Venice and bought a place here. The crack we saw outside had sneaked inside along the mortar seam and caught on a nail head. It had bled salt. Don Paolo touched nothing. He has a way of standing in a place like he's already at the funeral. I reached for the LED to switch it off, then paused. 3 knocks? I said, sounding stupid. He didn't answer. I rested my hand on the box with Henry's name like you would on a toy chest. It was solid and cold with damp. When I let go, I heard, clear as the bell, the sound of something small sliding across wood behind my left shoulder. I turned fast. On the shelf, tucked against the stone, lay a little brass object I hadn't seen before. It was a bell pull, the kind that would have hung from a thin cord. The cord itself was rotten to a husk, curled like an insect's leg. The pull was round with a little clapper inside. It moved slightly. Maybe I had bumped the shelf. Maybe. Enough, Don Paolo said quietly. He took the LED and put it in his pocket. We stepped out and closed the door. I locked it and replaced the tape, firm and careful. We stood there as the 4 p.m. horn sounded somewhere out in the haze. No little bell answered.
He told me to go have coffee.
And he walked to the chapel, slow but not hesitant, the way you walk when you've decided something and it's not up for debate. In the office, I pulled the logbook and wrote everything down because that's what you do to make the world plain. I wrote about the crack and the light and the key and the inside. I did not write about the knocks. I didn't write about the bell pull appearing. I folded the paper and put it under the blotter with the intent to type it into the maintenance report later. I think part of me wanted to see if the words would look crazier on a screen. I called Serena again and told her the vault existed and was sound enough but had a crack we'd address. She thanked me and said the husband had asked if he could visit tomorrow to sit near the cypresses because his wife liked them. I said we'd keep the place quiet for him. The last ferry for visitors is at 5 in the winter. The island empties. That's when the air changes again, softer and more private. I checked the gates and walked one final time down the Albright row. I don't know what I expected to find. The tape was there, the door solid. No sound, no light. As I turned to go, I saw a fresh footprint in the damp grit on the path beside the vault. A woman's size, narrow heel. A delicate tread with a half moon where the front of the shoe had caught. I glanced up and down the path. Nobody. The print pointed not toward the main walkway but toward the wall that faces the water. I crouched and put my hand next to it. The edges were soft. It had to be from earlier. We had visitors all day. I told myself to stop. When I got home to my small apartment near San Stai, I took a hot shower and tried not to think about bells. My Nana's stories walked into my head anyway. All the old Venetian ones about masked voices and voices that sound like yours. I made pasta and ate standing up. I watched a soccer replay with the sound low. The apartment creaked like it always does, and I felt every noise as if the building wanted to get my attention and not embarrass me. I almost slept. But around midnight, my phone lit the room. It was Serena, apologetic. The husband had left the hospital against advice. He was drunk. He had asked a cab to take him to the cemetery. The driver wouldn't do that at night. He had gotten out near Fondamente Nove and walked off. Could I check the island perimeter in the morning for signs he had tried to swim? The lagoon is not kind to the drunk and grieving. My stomach dropped the way it does when a boat rocks at the wrong time. I told her I'd go early. I went earlier than early. The sky was a lid. The first ferry wasn't running yet, so I took the small work launch we keep for maintenance emergencies. The motor coughed twice and then decided to be helpful. The water was slate. The wake folded behind me like a blanket being smoothed. I docked, climbed the wet steps, and unlocked the side gate. The fog was back, thicker than the day before. The big ships mourned into the mist with their horns. The island at that hour feels like a theater before anyone arrives. The cypresses are black curtains. I walked the outer path with a flashlight, watching for clothing on the rocks. Nothing. On the Murano side, I thought I saw a shape by the wall and almost called out before realizing it was a shadow from the iron cross on one of the vaults thrown huge across the gravel. My breath looked like gauze. When I reached the Albright row, I already knew I was going there. It felt like when you retrace steps you took in a dream to prove to yourself it wasn't a dream. The tape hung where I left it. The lock was closed. The stone looked darker, but in that fog everything looked darker. The bell was still, a little circle in the dim. I listened. The world held its breath. Then the horn from a ferry out on the water called longer than yesterday, and as it faded, the little bell on the Albright vault chimed once with a sound as thin as a pin dropped on a plate. Then 3 faint taps came from inside the stone, spaced the way you would space them if you had all the time in the world and wanted someone to be sure. I could have run. I didn't. I reached up and I took the bell in my hand and felt the cold. I said clearly, like I was talking to a child on the wrong side of a door. I hear you. It felt stupid and necessary at the same time. There was a pause. Then from beyond the door, a small answer. Not a knock this time, but the lightest dragging sound like a fingertip across wood. I used the key again. I will admit that my hands shook. I opened the door and the smell came. Old and damp and a little human, which is the smell of everything that loves you and leaves you. The shelves were as we had left them. The LED was gone because Don Paulo had it. The bell pull lay where it had lain. On the back wall near Henry's name, a thin line of wet had traced downward. Not from the crack this time, but from that wall niche with the family photograph. The glass was fogged from the inside. I wiped the outside and saw a different photo behind the veil of condensation. Not Henry. A woman with a wide smile and a raincoat, hair stuck to her forehead, standing in front of a brick wall that looked too familiar. The caption at the bottom of the photo paper, the kind you get from instant cameras, said Zoe. I don't know if the family had taken new photos on their last visit, or if the damp had shifted the stack. I don't know. I know how it sounds. I know what you're thinking. I didn't touch the photo. I didn't say her name out loud because I was suddenly afraid that names are a kind of invitation. I looked down at the shelf. There were a few salt crystals on the wood that I don't remember from yesterday, like a handful of coarse sugar someone had spilled. I put my palm flat on the threshold and felt cold that went up my arm and into my mouth. I stepped back, shut the door, locked it, and put the key in my pocket. When the first ferry arrived, I met Serena at the gate. She had a gray look like she had slept in a chair. We walked the perimeter again in the newer light. We found nothing. The husband wasn't there. An hour later, her radio told her that he had been found sitting on the edge of a dock wrapped in a thin hotel blanket, staring at the water like it might answer if he waited. He kept saying something about hearing bells. They took him back. She made a face that wasn't quite a smile and said, "People hear all kinds of things in fog." I walked her to the Albright row because she asked to see it. I didn't want to. I didn't want anyone else's feet in the dust of that path. But it wasn't mine to keep. We stood there together. The tape looked ordinary. The crack was what cracks are. She stepped closer and peered at the bell the way you look at a souvenir in a shop. "Do these still work?" she asked, playful but careful. I told her no. There was no cord. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe salt grows like that and old paper shifts and sound carries in fog like it does in a cathedral. Maybe grief is a bell that you hear, because the part of you that loved the person doesn't know where to go. I didn't say any of that. I walked back to the office and put the key in the drawer. Before I shut it, I saw a tiny salt trail on the wood where the key had rested. The way brine dries on a boat rail. I wiped it away quickly like a man who has broken something and doesn't want anyone to know. For the rest of the week, I avoided the Albright row until I couldn't. People come where they come. A tourist asked in a whisper if she could see the cypress path, the one she'd seen in a photo. A man in a suit brought a bouquet and stood under the trees and didn't cry out loud. Every time the foghorn sounded, I would stop what I was doing and listen for a thin answer. Sometimes I heard it, sometimes not. It's hard to say if it's worse when you do or when you don't. Yesterday, Don Paulo knocked on the office door with his half-smile. He had something wrapped in newspaper. "From the sacristy," he said, handing it to me. "A little bell that doesn't work anymore." "Put it away. People keep asking." I unwrapped it. It was the same shape as the one on the Albright vault, but older, heavier, with a cracked lip. I asked him where it had hung. "Above the chapel door," he said. "Years ago. We took the cord off when the wind would ring it at night. I never put it back." He looked at me like he wanted me to ask a question I wouldn't ask. Then he left. Late this afternoon, just before the last ferry, the husband came to the island with Serena walking a little behind him. He had that stunned look you get when time moves and you don't. He asked if he could sit for a minute near the cypresses. We let him.
He held nothing in his hands.
When he stood, he asked, not looking at me, if there were bells here. "Old bells," he said, "the kind for emergencies." I told him the truth that was safe. "There used to be," I said. "Now they're just for history." He nodded like he had expected that. As he turned away, he said almost to himself, "I hear them when the big boats pass." I watched him board the ferry. He stared at the water. When the horn sounded and the boat drifted into the fog, I heard the thin answer again behind me. I turned too fast. Nothing moved. The tape fluttered like the breath of someone you can't see. I waited until the sound of the ferry mixed with the evening, and then I walked back to the vault and put my fingertips on the stone. It was cold and a little damp. The crack traced the name with a line that looked like writing you couldn't read. I don't know what to tell you. I know how my nonna would end the story. She would tell you that some bells are not for waking the buried. They are for calling the living to witness. She would say that if you love a place enough, it keeps ringing you home in whatever voice you can hear. Maybe that's all this is. Maybe I'm a man who wants the quiet to be a little less quiet. Tonight the fog is thick again. The big ships are speaking to each other across the lagoon in their long, low language. Between them, every so often, there is a small sound from the direction of the Albright vault that could be a bell, and could be salt falling from stone, and could be the space between one life and the next not closing all the way. I lock the gate and check my pockets and walk to the dock to wait for the work launch. And in the corner of my hearing, something taps 3 times, polite as a knock, certain as tide, and I don't turn my head because I already know exactly where it comes from. I'm not posting this to scare anyone. I'm posting it because I need someone to tell me if what I saw can be explained by anything other than the thing my brain keeps circling back to. If you know Greyfriars, you know it's beautiful in the day and wrong at night. I say that as someone who has spent many nights there. Not as a tourist, not with a camera and a pint, but as a night warden with a radio and a key. I got the job last spring when hours were tight and rent wasn't getting cheaper. Most of the work is boring. Locking the side gates after closing, walking the paths with a torch, clearing bottles, telling drunk students to finish their ghost tours on the pavement. Sometimes you get foxes. Sometimes you get groups daring each other to jump the Mackenzie tomb railings. Mostly you get cold. My shift on the first night of this started on a Thursday. It had rained all day and the soil was dark and heavy, the sort that holds boot prints like a memory. I checked in with my supervisor, Moira, inside the small office by the west gate. She's in her 50s, hair always in a scarf, iron grip on a thermos. My partner for the shift was Callum, younger than me, funny in a dry way that gets you through the hours. We did our first walkthrough together, cutting across to the old section where the Victorian plots sit close, stones tilted like teeth. That's when I saw the sunken grave. I've seen slumping before. It happens. A coffin collapses, the earth settles, the surface dips. But this one looked recent and wrong. A neat rectangle of depression about a foot down, edges clean like someone had pressed a mold into the ground. The headstone was Scottish sandstone with a name worn to a guess, maybe Tom or Thomas, and the date somewhere in the 1860s. A small lamb was carved above the name, the way they used to mark children's graves. The lamb's face had been smoothed by weather into a featureless bud. Add it to the list, Callum said, peering over. We'll give it to grounds in the morning. I took a photo with my phone for the maintenance log, held the torch to get the texture right, then slipped a bright plastic repair flag beside the stone, the way we mark trip hazards. We finished the walk, and I remember thinking that was the most interesting thing likely to happen. The morning after, when I came back to hand over, Moira told me grounds had already sorted the dip. She showed me on the screen. A small crew came at 8, leveled the soil, tamped it down, even the turf. The photo on the screen looked textbook perfect. Quick one, she said. Nice when it's easy. Friday night I went out alone for the first round. The air had a bite. My breath came visible as soon as I stepped past the office and into the older section. I shone my torch between the stones, picking up names, familiar angel shapes, the curve of the high wall that separates the kirkyard from the schoolyard beyond. I found the grave again without meaning to. It's like my feet remembered. Only it wasn't level anymore, the soil had sunk. Not in a messy way. Not like someone had jumped on it, but in a precise, even perfect rectangle exactly as the night before. My repair flag was still there, half leaning now against the headstone as if embarrassed. I squatted and pressed the flat of my palm to the ground. It was cold and firm. When I lifted my hand, the dirt grains stayed in the pattern of my fingerprints for a second before the wind brushed them out. I took another photo, same angle as the one I'd taken before, and walked back to the office. You're kidding, Moira said when I showed her. She pulled up the footage again. The crew had done it right, we could both see that. Maybe the fill settled, I said. Water under there? In a day? She shook her head, but she logged it anyway. We'll have them go again. Before I went back out, an older man knocked at the office door and stuck his head in. He was one of the regulars who cut through the kirkyard to save 10 minutes on the way to the grass market. I'd seen him enough times to nod. Close up, I caught the tobacco and wet wool smell. "You seen the fox?" he asked me. "Red one with the nicked ear. He's been running circles like mad." "Where?" I asked. He thumbed over his shoulder. "By the school wall." He left without waiting for an answer. I did the rest of my rounds trying to forget about the grave. I checked the railings on the Mackenzie mausoleum, locked. I chased off 2 teens giggling too loudly near the back path. I drank from my thermos and watched the steam drift and unspool. Around midnight, I walked past the grave again and saw someone's shoe prints in the damp earth. Not across the grave. I don't mean that. I mean around it, close to the headstone in tight loops. The prints were ordinary trainers, maybe size 9 or 10, treading one over the other in a path as neat as a rope coil. It looked like someone had walked around that stone in shrinking circles until their toes were almost touching the base. No other prints came or went, just the loop and my own. I bent down and took a third photo, then stood there listening to the quiet. It wasn't silent. There was the far-off hum of traffic, a piped-in laugh from a pub, the tiny sound of water working its way through wet grass. But it felt like the place itself was holding a breath. I radioed it in. Callum's voice crackled back from the far end. "Maybe someone's taking the piss," he said. "You and your marked grave." "Maybe," I said and didn't believe it. Saturday morning, grounds came again. They don't like being called twice. The crew lead, a guy named Ian with shoulders like a wardrobe, joked that I'd cursed his schedule. They redid it. More soil, better tamping, a check with the level. He waved me over and made a show of putting his foot on the surface. It didn't move. He made me try. "Solid. Happy?" Ian said. "Thrilled," I said. Saturday night I started later, around 10, to cover an event in the hall next door. It was one of those evenings where the mist doesn't roll in so much as stay low and still. Like it's chosen a height and decided to rest there. My torch beam went wide and pale. The paths glistened. I tried not to go straight to the grave. I made myself do the far tour first, up by the wall with the embedded cells where they used to keep the accused covenanters, then down past the older stones that lean like they're whispering to each other. I found a folded flyer from a ghost tour jammed in a crack and fished it out. When I finally cut back to the Victorian section, I saw the ground from several angles before my brain admitted the obvious. It had risen back to level again. It wasn't just level. It looked like it had been dressed by someone with pride. The soil had been combed, the edges were crisp, the turf replaced to match the surrounding patchwork. The repair flag lay on its side like a little drowned thing. I stopped a few feet away and let my breath fall silent. A fox skittered along the path behind me and paused, ears flicking. It watched me for a second, then moved on, not taking its eyes off the ground as it passed the stone. I took out my phone to take another photo and found my last one hadn't saved. I scrolled. Thursday's initial dip gone. Friday's dip gone. The loop of prints gone. In their place were blank gray squares with the message, "Unable to load image." I felt that small, unreasonable panic you get when tech fails somewhere it shouldn't, like when your torch flickers just as you step into a dark room. I backed up, raised the radio, and told Callum I needed him by the old section. He swore, said he was near the front gate, and gave me 2 minutes. Waiting, I heard something I've never heard there before. It was faint. It was steady. It came from below. It was breathing, not human breathing. Or not only. It didn't rasp or wheeze. It was the sound of something big drawing in and letting out air under pressure. Like the bellows in a place that works iron. Like the ocean shoved into a chest. The breath went in and the ground under my boots felt minutely tighter, as if the earth itself had tensed. The breath went out and I swear to you the soil eased. I sidestepped, shining the torch not on the grave but on the edges around it, looking for signs of a tunnel or void, a sinkhole in the making. The ground looked whole. There were no cracks, no disturbed plots, nothing but careful turf and the lamb worn smooth above the name. My light found the base of the headstone and something else, a scuff or a scrape new. Not deep, just a mark, like the stone had moved against something. Callum's steps came quick on the path. He's louder when he's spooked. "All right," he said, a little out of breath. "What's the thing?" I pointed, not trusting my voice. He looked. "Looks fine," he said, softening it with a joke. "Best grave in the place." "Listen," I said. We both stood there with our breath held. The air pressed into the soil, then eased. I saw the moment it registered on his face. His jaw tightened. "Wind," he said. "Underground pipes. The heating next door something. The college boilers are off weekend nights," I said. I knew because the night everything shuts down is the night the kirkyard goes most still. He didn't argue. He was listening too hard to think of what to say. There was a clink behind us like a dropped coin. We turned our lights and saw a man standing by the path, the regular who had asked me about the fox. He must have been closer than I realized. He lifted his hand polite. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to startle. You're not supposed to be in here after dark," Callum said, but he didn't put any heat in it. The man didn't seem to care about us. He was looking at the grave. "I used to live off the cowgate," he said, as if we'd asked. "When I was small, my gran brought me here with bread for the birds. She told me if I got lost, all I had to do was go in circles and I'd make a path home." "Sir?" I said, unsure what to do with that. He nodded at the stone. "Not everything that circles is lost." He stepped back and walked away the long way round, keeping to the path, his feet making hardly any noise at all. We let him go. We should have called it in. We should have, but both of us were thinking about the breathing earth. "Let's do a perimeter," Callum said finally. He walked a wide circle around the grave, keeping a couple of meters between his boots and the edge. I walked the opposite way. Our lights crossed and recrossed. The breathing didn't change. It was like being near a sleeper. You know how you unconsciously soften your movements to avoid waking them? That on the third loop, my foot struck something that shouldn't have been there. My torch beam found it. A pair of shoes tucked neat against the back of the headstone. They were white trainers with mud dried in a fine pattern around the soles, laces looped through the top eyelets but not tied. They were warm when I put my fingers inside to check for a size. Warm, like someone had taken them off moments ago. The size sticker was half peeled, the number smudged. I looked at the ground. No bare footprints led away. Callum swore low, the only time that night I heard him use that word with intent. He reached for the radio and I stopped him with my palm up. Not because I didn't want help, but because something in the air said be quiet the way a hand on the back says wait. It was the feeling you get when a busker stops playing mid-song and the silence feels like a held note that could snap or soar. He lowered the radio. We stood still. The ground moved. I don't know how else to say it. The grave rose maybe half an inch, smooth as breath in, and the edge of turf lifted so subtly you'd have missed it if your eyes weren't already fixed on it. Then it sank, gentle as breath out, and settled back into itself. There was no soil given up at the edges. No crack, no collapse. Just up and down like a sleeping thing. Callum took a step back and that small motion broke it. I told myself to be a professional. I told myself to do the sensible thing and cordon it off. We both did the things you do when a place turns into a problem. We put the repair flag back. We looped red tape from our kit around the nearest stones to keep anyone from walking through in the morning. We took more photos, though I didn't expect them to save. Moira met us at the gate when we called her to come from home. She listened to our rushed explanation, to the part that made us sound ridiculous. Checked the grave with us once in the beam of her torch, then said, in that practical way of hers, "Right. We'll shut the west path and ring the council in the morning. Nobody touches anything tonight. She pointed at me. Do hourly checks. Don't get clever. I did the checks. On the first hour, the shoes were where I'd left them. The tape had sagged and I retied it. The ground lay level. On the second hour, it had sunk inside the rectangle a few centimeters. The footprints were back, circling the headstone in tighter loops than before. So tight the innermost ring made a shallow groove in the wet grit. I took a photo and watched the preview save, breathe, and then change to gray. On the third hour, close to 4 in the morning, I sat on the low wall opposite with my thermos and sipped. I don't know why I sat down. It's not like me. I think I was trying to show the place that I could be still too. That's when the breathing changed. Up until then, it had been a slow, steady tide. Now it quickened, not frantic but determined, like someone roused from a deep sleep and told to climb. I stood, capped the thermos, slid it into my pocket without taking my eyes off the ground. The turf swelled higher this time, then sank. It swelled again and the tiny chips of grit around the headstone shivered. I took 2 steps forward before I realized I was moving, before what I was about to do had shape in my mind. I put my hand on the top of the headstone. I don't know what I expected. The stone was cold, slightly damp under my palm, and it felt like a key in a door that should never have been locked, is how I will say it to myself when I wake at stupid hours. If you've ever leaned into a stuck window and felt the first give, you know that small thrill of motion. It was like that. Except the thrill was replaced by an urge to lift, and I couldn't tell if the urge was mine or not. The stone shivered. I could feel it with the bones of my hand. The breathing deepened. The air grew colder on my face, the kind of cold that makes your eyes water. I found myself saying out loud to nobody, "Stop," like I was talking to a child fidgeting in a pew. I think I asked nicely. The headstone moved a fraction of an inch. Not forward, not back. Up, as if something under the soil had taken hold of its base and pushed. The scrape at the bottom edge lengthened. A smell leaked out. Not rot. Dryness. Old books and air unbreathed so long it had forgotten how. I took my hand away. The stone settled. The breathing slowed. I realized I'd been holding my breath with it and let it out in a rush. I half laughed because there are only two ways to respond to the unreasonable. You laugh or you run. I've never been a runner. Footsteps came on the path. Callum again. He looked at my hand, then at the stone. "Don't," he said. I wasn't, I said. We stood there until the sky went from black to the slightly less black that passes for dawn here. The breathing eased, and then, as the birds pretended it was morning, stopped. By 9, grounds were there and cross. I didn't try to explain the breathing to Iain. He wouldn't have had time anyway. He looked at the sunken patch and set his jaw. They leveled it again, and this time they drilled a small test bore to see if there was a void beneath. The drill went down 3 feet and hit something it shouldn't have hit with a dull thunk that made the crew step back. Iain leaned in, put his ear near the drill, then shook his head and told the others to fill the hole and not speak about it in front of visitors. For the rest of that day, tourists came and took photos and nobody knew a thing. The kirkyard does that. It keeps its own counsel when the sun is out. I went home and slept badly, and when I woke, I told myself I'd imagined the worst of it. I made tea and stood at the window and watched a bus go by and felt ordinary for 20 minutes. Sunday night was my last shift before 2 days off. I almost didn't go back to the grave first. I avoided it by doing all the petty things I could think of. Untangling a bit of wire on a fence, picking up a crisp packet someone had wedged in a crook of the Mackenzie railings, counting how many times the motion light misfired by the east gate. None of it mattered. I was only away from the thing I was thinking about. When I finally walked to the Victorian section, I stopped where the path gave me a long view. I could see the headstone, the lamb, the neat rectangle of earth, the red tape drooping like bunting gone tired. I could also see the prints. They started at the path beside me and went straight toward the stone. Bare feet small. A woman's maybe, or a teenager's. They hit the turf, then carried on into the rectangle of level soil and vanished. The loops around the headstone were deeper, frantic now, overlapping. There was a set of larger prints too, trainers, size 9 or 10, paced in wider arcs like someone had tried to step close and then thought better of it, over and over. I called out without meaning to. "Hello?" The word felt wrong in my mouth and went nowhere. The breathing didn't come back. Maybe it was waiting. I couldn't stand the quiet. I stepped to the edge of the rectangle and did the stupidest thing I've done on duty. I set my foot on the dirt over the grave. It held. Of course it did. It wasn't a trapdoor or a stage trick, but there was give. Not like mud, like a chest under 2 blankets. I backed off at once, heat prickling at the back of my neck. I didn't want to be the one weight too many. My phone buzzed. A text from Moira, council survey on Monday. Do not engage. Her timing would have been funny on any other night. I put the phone away, told myself to do a last loop and go sit in the office where there is a kettle and electric light. I turned to leave. I would have left. I know I would have. But something made a noise behind me that sounded exactly like a small laugh swallowed and turned into a cough. I spun back, light up, breath held. The shoes I'd found before were gone. Not gone as in walked away. Gone as in not there anymore, not tucked, not kicked aside. The space behind the headstone was bare and clean as if nothing had ever been left there. The only new thing was a smear of mud on the stone itself, 4 inches up from the base, fingers width, sliding downward like a hand had tried to hold on. I walked backward until I felt the path under my heels. I didn't turn my back on the stone. I don't remember deciding to, but at some point I started to mark the time out loud. 10 seconds, I said. 20. When I hit a minute, I stopped because I realized I was speaking in a voice that didn't sound like mine. The fox with the nicked ear trotted into view. He paused by the edge of the tape and stared at the grave with the same wary look animals use for rivers they know but don't trust. He sniffed, once, twice, then turned his head to me like he expected an answer. His ears went back. He moved on and did not circle. I left the tape up. I left the repair flag. I walked away and did the most normal thing I could think of, which was write a short incident note in the office and make a cup of tea and stare at the way the steam slid into the ceiling without catching. When I went back an hour later, nothing had changed in the way that mattered to sight. The ground was level. The print still looped. The headstone wore its lamb. I've been off 2 days now. I meant to go back and check for myself before posting this, but the survey team came and the place has been closed to the public on and off. Moira texted me yesterday to say they opened the section briefly and then shut it again, pending further evaluation, which is the council's way of saying they didn't want to decide. She also told me, in the same tone someone tells you not to drink the tap water but won't say why, that my photos from those nights didn't load for her either when she tried to pull them into the incident folder. Blank gray squares. Probably the cloud, she said. Callum sent me a message at noon. You see the circles? I typed yes and then deleted it and typed what circles. He didn't reply. Later he sent a photo taken from the path, far enough away that it didn't trip whatever breaks cameras there. It showed the grave level and neat. It also showed a faint darker ring in the grass around it, like a bicycle track in wet ground. Then another inside it. Then another. The rings were not perfect. They wobbled where they had to accommodate stones. They overlapped. They grew tighter. The smallest circle touched the headstone. I asked him when he took it. Dawn, he wrote. Looked flat by noon. I stared at the picture until the rings blurred. In the bottom corner, there was something I hadn't noticed at first. A fox red as rust moving at the very edge of frame, running straight, not looking back. You can tell me it's the fill settling. You can tell me it's old air moving where it hasn't moved for a century and making the soil lift and drop. You can tell me it's a prank and someone's found a way to fool our eyes and our tech. You can tell me that sometimes shoes warm in the sun and feel like they belong to a foot, and that my hand on the stone didn't do what I think it did. You can tell me all that and I will nod, but I will also tell you this. And if you know that place, you know I'm not making the words up to scare you. When I stood there with my palm on the headstone and felt the first small lift from below, the urge that rose in me to help was not mine. It was older than me and deeper than the stone and very, very patient. Moira says they'll put a proper barrier around it this week, a tidy fence with a sign, and in a month, everyone will forget. Tourists will take their pictures with the statue of the wee dog at the gate and chuck coins at the Mackenzie railings and tell each other stories in the accents they bring from home and nothing under. The soil will mind. But if you walk there after dark and you feel the ground thicken under your boots and knees, and you see the faint loops in the grass like someone trying not to step too close has been stepping closer every night, and you find yourself counting aloud without quite deciding to start, don't put your hand on the stone. I'm not telling you that because I think something will drag you down. I'm telling you that because the feeling that comes just before you do it, the one that says lift, will feel like a good deed. It won't be. And if in the morning you notice the ground is perfectly level and the flag has fallen over and the tape has loosened and there are no footprints but yours, don't tell yourself nothing happened. The grave does what lungs do. It rises, it falls, it waits for you to breathe with it. I don't know who is under there. The name is smudged to history and the lamb means it might be someone small. But maybe the stone was reused, which they did sometimes when families ran out of money. Or maybe what breathes is not a person at all but a place that learned to mimic us. I don't know. What I know is that on the third night, when I stood back and made myself be still, the breathing matched mine for 10 minutes. I tried to slow it. It waited me out. Then it went on at the pace it chose, and I, who am supposed to keep people safe from holes in the ground and railings with rusted nails, let it. Greyfriars is beautiful in the day. At night, it is not just the dark that makes it wrong. It is the feeling that the ground does not quite belong to the living, and that if you mark the earth for repair, it may politely accept your flag and then move back to the shape it prefers, like breath in a chest that no longer needs air but remembers the habit. If you go, don't. If you must, walk wide. And if you see the circles, don't step inside the smallest one. That's the part where the world thins. That's where the shoes go warm. That's where the lamb on the stone, faceless and kind, looks like it is listening. I'm not the superstitious type. I say that up front because people always assume groundskeepers are either drunk philosophers or ghost chasers. I'm neither. I like quiet, I like a routine, and I like knowing what my hands are doing from the first light to the last. Olszany Cemetery gave me all three. If you've never been, it's not one neat field of headstones. It's like a city that decided to lie down. Tangles of ivy swallow iron fences, angels lean at odd angles, and there are side paths that end in thickets because the old maps forgot they were there. Trams rattle on Vinohradska if the wind points right, and you can smell chestnuts roasting from a cart outside the gate when the season turns cold. The living hum outside. Inside, it's work. I started in late September, just before the candle rush for Dushitsky. The office was an old caretaker's cottage with a crooked stove, one hard chair, and a bulletin board where our supervisor, Clara, pinned lists. We were 3 full-timers. Me, a guy named Jarek who pretended to hate everyone, and an older man, called Victor, who moved slow, but remembered every name on every monument like he'd taught them Czech himself. They gave me a sector on the far eastern side, between a family mausoleum with cracked blue tiles and a patch overrun by ground cover that flowered white in spring and smelled like old sugar. I was told to clear leaves, straighten stones that had heaved in the frost, brush off lichen, check for any fresh vandalism, and report broken fences. My tool shed was a squat box with a rusted hasp. Inside it, 2 rakes, a broom with a nail through the handle, a trowel, a short spade, a bottle of linseed oil, and a sack of sand. I kept a new brush for lettering because I hate scratching marble. That first week, everything felt like a rhythm I could hum to. Coffee before dawn, unlock the gate, log the weather, walk my lines, and listen to pigeons scuffle under the chapel eaves. It was simple, and the simplicity made me feel like I'd made a good decision leaving my last job, which had been night security in Zhizhkov. You don't need to know much about that, except I had one conversation there that I couldn't stop replaying. It stuck to me like coal dust. She came on my 4th day at Olszany. It was late afternoon, the light turning that clean gold that makes the gilded letters flash like they're wet. I was sweeping a path near the outer wall when I heard soft steps. Not heels, quiet shoes. I looked up expecting tourists, because we get them, especially the ones who want Kafka's relatives and take moody photos for whatever app is popular that week. But this woman wasn't a tourist. She carried a small paper bag low against her hip and moved like she knew exactly where she was going. She had a black scarf wound around her head, and the stiff kind of coat you only see on serious people or those who buy clothes once and make them last forever. Her face was thin. Her eyes were red, as if the cold made them tear up. She gave me a nod like we were both strangers in a library and kept walking. Normally, I don't notice visitors except to make sure they're not prying open a tomb, but something tugged at me about her. Maybe it was the way she didn't hesitate at any fork, just picked the narrowest path like it owed her a debt. I finished my section and came back around to lock the shed just as I saw her again. She'd lit a candle in a glass jar and set it, at the base of a headstone in a row I hadn't been assigned yet. The name was Polakova. The dates were recent. She stood there and didn't move while the wick struggled, and then she did something I still can't explain without sounding nosy. She looked over at me and asked for my name. Just so I know. "Who looks after her street?" she said, and her voice was steady, like you'd ask a bus driver which line stops where. Not flirting, not even warm. Just a practical question that under a gray sky felt oddly intimate. I told her my first name, my full name, the one that hardly anyone uses. It's not on my badge. It's not on anything, in fact, because it embarrasses me. When I was a kid, my grandfather used it when he wanted me to feel 5 years old. I hadn't said it out loud in years. I didn't mean to say it now. It just slid out like my mouth had old orders tucked away in it. She repeated it once quietly, like she needed to make sure it fit behind her teeth, and thanked me. "You'll see me around," she added, and left. And that should have been the end. The next morning, my tools were wrong. I know how I leave things. Rakes leaned tips up in the left corner, broom flat along the back wall, trowel on the shelf. Above the oil, spade on the floor with the blade angled so nobody trips if they reach in blind. It's a habit from too many small sheds at too many jobs. But when I unlocked at dawn, the rake handles were crossed like a crooked X in the center. The trowel was set by the door, bristle brush next to it, broom parallel to both. It wasn't random. It was arranged. I stood there feeling foolish, then told myself Jarek was messing with me. He liked to leave cigarette butts exactly in the middle of the paths he'd cleaned so he could complain later that the dead smoked. He'd do this just to watch me scratch my head. I put everything where it belonged, did my rounds, and waited for him to wander over. He didn't. At lunch, I walked to the cottage and found him half asleep with one boot off and soup going cold on the stove. He swore he hadn't been near my section. He didn't care enough to lie good. Victor just shrugged. Wind knocks more than branches, he said. I didn't have a response for that. That afternoon, near the same time as the day before, I saw the woman again. She came with the same paper bag and the same unhurried steps. I told myself not to be weird and went the other way. For the rest of the day, I pushed leaves and pretended my shed was my shed, and nobody cared enough to nest my tools like dolls. The following morning, the arrangement changed. This time, the short spade lay flat in front of the shed like a bar. The rake and broom handles made a right angle pointing inward, toward the north path, and the trowel balanced on the spade handle as if it were a pointer chasing a compass. It looked like something an old woman might make with cutlery to keep cats out of the butter. I stared for a long minute, feeling the hair on my arms lift like I'd stepped into a draft. I moved it all back. I told myself it was a practical joke and that I was failing it by reacting. When I locked up that evening, I checked everything twice. I even scratched a tiny line on the dirt floor with my boot heel to see if it would be disturbed. I walked the fence along the wall in case somebody had snuck in. The locks were clean. The only other entry was a gap where a root had shoved a stone aside, and even I barely fit there sideways. I squeezed through anyway, tore my jacket, and found myself in the outline of an older boundary. A place nobody tended because it fell between the official sectors like a missing staircase. There were stones there black with soot. Not burn marks, soot, like the kind you find in a chimney that hasn't been cleaned in 50 years. It dusted the top of one slab as if a slow hand had patted it. I rubbed some between my fingers. It smeared like ash. I did not like that. I don't know why I didn't tell Clara. Maybe because it would have sounded like I was trying to blame a nonsense thing for my own carelessness, and I need this job. Maybe because I didn't want to hear the easy explanation, which would have been vandals. We always say that. It keeps things human. Instead, I swept off the soot, made a note on my clipboard to check the wall's gap, and went home to my rented room on the edge of Zhizhkov with a headache like someone had pressed a heel into my forehead. On the third morning, I stopped breathing for a second when I opened the shed. Everything was outside, not tossed, arranged. The rake teeth sat against the packed dirt like a crown. The broom formed a base. The trowel lay dead center, and the spades handle crossed the lot, and if you'd asked me in that moment what it looked like, I'd have said a hand. Not an actual hand, obviously, but the idea of one. Something reaching up out of the ground, palm open, waiting. I took one step back and my boot scuffed the line I'd scratched the night before. It was there. It was obvious, and it had footprints across it. The prints were clearest where the dirt was damp near the shed wall. They were not big. Barefoot. You don't expect to see barefoot prints in a cemetery before sunrise at the end of September, when the cold sits down hard. The toes were narrow and long, and you could make out the ball and heel. The prints ran from the gap in the wall to the shed and stopped there, like the person had been careful to step in their own tracks on the way back out, or like they were waiting me to notice and follow. I felt a sudden, very childish wish to shut the door and hold it. Instead, I picked up the trowel and the spade. The metal was warm. That bothered me more than anything, as if someone had been holding them the way you might hold someone's hand. That day, I lasted until 4, then found an excuse to walk by the office. The woman was there. She'd come earlier than usual, standing near the door and warming her hands at the stove with that same paper bag clutched shut. Clara was giving her directions to the section I tended. "He's thorough," she told the woman, nodding my way. "The new one. The woman looked at me and said my full name again comfortably now, like she'd decided it belonged to me. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't smile. She just said thank you, as if I'd already done something kind for her. Then she left. I stood very still for a moment because it felt like I'd been touched and I couldn't figure out where. That night, I dreamed of a blackened stone with letters brushed clear, and of the sound damp ashes make when you stir them with a stick. On the fourth morning, the ash was real. It lay on the flat stone I'd found beyond the wall gap. Not the whole surface, just an oval patch like a small pillow. You could see the finger marks where something had been dragged through the soot to make lines. It looked like a child had tried to write. The first time, you can convince yourself anything wasn't what it was. Not this. I knelt and traced the strokes without touching them. A straight line down, a crossbar, a short line like a breath, another angle. Then unmistakably the first letter of my name, not the short name on my badge, the long one I had told her, the one nobody says. I unloaded my brush, dipped it in clean water from the bottle I keep on my belt, and started to wipe the ash off the stone. The water loosened it and turned it slick and gray, and I had to stop when I realized my hands were shaking enough to leave streaks. I stepped back, found the breath I'd lost, and laughed a little at myself because fear sometimes comes out sideways. I said out loud, "Enough," to no one, and went to my work like a stubborn mule. People think cemeteries are empty until evening, but there's a whole day shift of the living. Grounds crew, of course, and mourners who prefer quiet mornings, and the old men who sit on the bench by the gate arguing about a football club that moved fields 30 years ago, and people with lunch breaks who come to light candles for mothers, brothers, loves. You learn not to stare. You learn the difference between someone who wants to be left alone and someone who wants a nod to hold on to. I thought I knew anyway, until she started coming every day and I felt like a thread had been tied between us and pulled tight. I tried telling myself to ignore it. The tools, the ash, the letters forming like frost on a window. I didn't go back to the stone at midday, and I didn't check it before I left, and I certainly didn't stay late to see it in the dusk. That's what I told myself I'd do. You can probably guess what happened. It was a job for a second person. That's what I told Victor at lunch. "Come walk the old boundary with me," I said, trying to sound gruff. "There's a wall gap, we should fix it." He came. He walked with me to the place where my jacket had torn. I led us through, sucking my stomach in to make space around the root. We stood in the little no man's land and I pointed at the stone. It was clean. That was somehow worse. I'd left the smear marks that morning, I knew I had. I could picture them exactly. They were gone. It wasn't just clean, it was polished. You could read the inscription, Kamila Polakova, 1989-2023. Same surname as the stone the woman visited on the main path, likely the same family. A small oval photo set in the corner showed a dark-haired girl with a serious mouth. Victor rubbed his chin and made a small noise. "You see it too?" I asked before I could stop myself. He tilted his head like he'd heard a bird. "See what?" I almost told him about the ash. I didn't. Cowardice sometimes looks like sense from the outside. "The wall," I said instead, and tapped the shifted stone. He squinted at it, nodded. "We should mortar that before winter," he said, and turned to go. I followed. I didn't look back. Sometimes not looking back is the only rule you have. That night I took the tram home and watched my reflection judder in the window like a loose tooth. I thought about names. How yours can be a secret even if it's the only thing you've had since you were born. How saying it out loud in the wrong air can make you feel too visible, like you've taken your coat off in a room of strangers. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself I should eat something besides bread. I did neither. On the fifth morning, the ash said the first three letters. I didn't clean it. I didn't touch the tools. They were lined up outside the shed in that patient waiting way again. I walked the paths and did everything else and pretended there wasn't a knot in my stomach that pulled tighter. When footsteps approached from behind me around 4 o'clock. "I brought this," she said. She held out the paper bag. It wasn't heavy. Inside was a jar candle and a handful of matches wrapped in wax paper. "For her?" I asked. My voice came out softer than I liked. "For you," she said. "You look tired. It's a small thing when a stranger says that kindly and the kindness hurts." "What's your name?" I asked finally. If I'm giving away mine, I want to hold someone else's in exchange. She hesitated for a second, then said, "Petra." That might be true. It might not. Names can be coats people try on. We stood together in that narrow path where the ivy tries to knit itself across your knees. I said, "You come late." "I work nights," she said. "Easier to think with the city asleep." She turned the paper bag so I could set it in my pocket. "Thank you for keeping it tidy." "I don't mind," I said, and meant it. I wanted to ask her if she'd been to the old Boundary. I wanted to ask if she knew about the hidden stone, the one that needed dusting but had been polished smooth, and if she had ever gone barefoot in cold dirt, and if her toe prints were as long and narrow as the ones I'd seen. I didn't ask. Instead, before my brain could filter it, I said, "It's strange. Someone's been writing." My tongue almost stalled on that last word like it was hard to say it in daylight. She didn't blink. "People leave messages," she said. "To the living, to the dead. Same need. And to me, maybe you're handy," she said, and her mouth moved like it might want to smile but had forgotten how. "Maybe you said your name out loud in the wrong place and now the wrong place thinks you're listening. Do you believe in wrong places?" I asked. She glanced over my shoulder, past me toward the gap in the wall I didn't realize was visible from that angle until I saw her gaze find it. She didn't answer. After a second, she touched the sleeve of my coat with 2 fingers, not a grip, just a touch, and said, "If you ever can't sleep, don't walk at night. This ground has a good memory." That evening, I tried to do a sensible thing and went home early. I lay on my bed with the candle she'd given me on the windowsill, unlit. The jar made a faint ticking sound as it cooled against the glass. I folded my hands and felt like a child told to keep still at a funeral. I got up and went back. It was just after sunset when I let myself in through the small gate with my copy key. The city noise had flattened to that low background hum, and the leaves made soft sounds as they settled, and from somewhere deeper, a dog barked once and then thought better of it. I told myself I was just going to check the shed latch. I told myself I wasn't going to look. I looked. The ash on the Palakova stone in the gap had finished my name. Every letter, careful and even, like a school exercise done by someone trying not to make a mistake. There were fingerprints in the ash. They were not dirty because the ash itself was clean, if that makes sense. It wasn't from a burned thing. It was from something ground down to the purest form of gray. I felt a dry feeling start behind my eyes, like tears that didn't know how to gather. "Enough," I said again. It didn't sound like a command this time. It sounded like I was asking for something. I took the water from my belt, poured it over the letters, rubbed with the brush until the stone felt like cool tooth enamel under my knuckles, and then I did the worst thing I could have done. I said my name out loud to the dark, in full, and added, "I don't want this." I don't know what I thought would happen. Nothing, probably. But when you talk to something, you make it a thing you can talk to. I heard steps behind me to my left, not the crunch of shoes, not the thunk of boots, bare feet quick, like a person crossing a cold kitchen floor. I turned and saw the outline of someone standing just beyond the gap in the wall. If it had been anyone else, I would have called out. I would have said, "Wine, we're closed," or "Hello," or "Do you need help?" But it wasn't like that. It was like you walk into a room and see the chair your grandmother used to sit in, and for a second your body believes she's there not because of what you see, but because of how the air feels around that shape. "Don't," I said, because I'd run out of more complicated words. The shape didn't move. It didn't lean or tilt. It had that feeling still things have when they're actually waiting, not just paused. It was then that I realized something about the woman, Petra, if that's her name. I realized I'd never seen her in daylight after that first time. Late afternoons, yes. Dusk, yes. In the office near the stove, where the light sharpens faces to clear edges, yes. But never at noon. And I realized, with that clumsy tourist logic your brain pulls when it's afraid, that the surname on the stones was the same, and that thank you was the kind of thing people say when they need someone to keep smoothing the sheets. I didn't run. I don't know if I could have. I backed out of the notch in the wall and walked the long way around to the main path. The angels leaned. The trams hummed. The chapel windows reflected the last bruise of light out of the sky. My shed was shut fast, untouched from earlier. I put my hand on the door and breathed the way you breathe before a doctor looks in your throat. My phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. Don't laugh. I know how that sounds. The message contained one word. My name, the long one in full, spelled exactly the way my grandfather spelled it when he wrote it in pencil in the front of books he gave me. The number wasn't Czech. It had too many digits in an arrangement that looked wrong, like a misdial that still somehow landed where it meant to. I stared until the screen timed out and went black. I could have shown it to someone the next day. I didn't. I deleted it. That felt like putting a lid on a pot of something you didn't want to smell. The next week was a series of small surrenders. The ash kept coming, not every day, but as if it had a schedule that didn't match mine. Sometimes it was only the first letter, clean and simple. Sometimes it was a full line, my name neat at the top margin of the stone like a title. Once it was backwards, like someone had copied it from a mirror. I stopped cleaning it right away. I'd wait until midday, then brush it off with firm strokes and rinse the brush. I started to lock my tools inside with a chain, which is ridiculous because the shed itself wasn't secure. But rituals matter to people even if they don't help. Jarek started complaining that someone had been moving his wheelbarrow. He said it without looking at me, like he was telling the air so it would take a message to whoever needed it. "Leave my things alone," he said one morning, but softer than his usual barking tone. "They're old, but they're mine." He found cigarette butts arranged in a circle around his barrow later that day and decided to stop leaving them in the paths. Fear at its habits. I avoided Petra. She avoided me too, in a way that felt coordinated without either of us saying so. When we did cross, our nods were functional, like people passing in a narrow kitchen, who both know if the other hadn't moved a centimeter to the left, they would have touched, and neither of them plans for that. One evening during Candle Rush, the cemetery filled with that flicker you get when everyone decides to remember at once. The air smelled like wax and smoke and damp marble. Children ran and were shushed. An old woman asked me to reach a vase on a high shelf in a family crypt, and I did, holding my breath like the air inside was private. When I came back out, a man I didn't know stopped me and asked where the Polakova plots were. His eyes had the look people get when the map in their head stops working. I pointed him toward the main path to the stone where the woman first stood with the paper bag. He thanked me and said he was her brother. He said the name Kamala with a careful smile, as if he needed to shape it into something that wouldn't break in his mouth. "Do you come late?" I asked because it blurted out before my better sense could net it. "I don't like the dark," he said. "My sister," he shook his head. "She's braver." He meant the living sister, not the dead one. I pictured Petra with her paper bag and her steady voice. It didn't fit right with the stone in the gap, with the ash being so clean, with the bare feet. But then nothing fits when you're holding it at arm's length. The last night, if you can call it night when there was still a smear of color left toward Vinarati, came a few days after that. I'd stayed late with Victor to haul branches. He left at twilight, his steps loud on the gravel until the corner swallowed him. I stood under an old plane tree and watched what looked like smoke drift low across the ground. It wasn't mist. We know mist. This was gray, and it moved with a purpose, curling around the base of the stones like a cat doing a head count. It had that chalky smell without any burn behind it. The ashes had stopped being marks on marble and decided to go walking. I did what you do when something makes you feel small. I made work. I went to the shed to put away the last of the tools and found the door open. Inside, everything stood where it belonged. The rake, the broom, the trowel on the shelf. The chain hung from its hook unlatched. On the floor, in a rectangle not much bigger than a pillow, ash had been smoothed into a blank slate. No letters yet. The brush I use for inscriptions lay beside it, bristles, clean. Behind me, someone breathed. I didn't turn. You'd think that would be the instinct, but it wasn't. The breath was too close. It didn't stir my hair or touch my neck, but it was close enough that turning would have put my face in someone else's air. I bent down slowly, picked up the brush and set it on the shelf. Then I said very softly, "I don't belong to you." The sentence surprised me. I hadn't known I was holding it. I heard bare feet step back. Not away, just enough space for me to turn without touching. I turned. The doorway framed the path beyond, and the path framed the gap in the wall, and beyond the gap, the stone was a square of paler dark. There was a figure at the edge of the path. Not a shadow, not a person. Something that knew how to take up the outline of a person while refusing to be a person. It had the shape of someone standing still with their arms close to their sides the way you do when you're cold. The ash on the floor caught a draft and lifted at the edges, then settled again. A match smell threaded the air, sulfur, sharp and faint. Someone had struck one and blown it out without lighting anything. Her voice came from the left, not from the figure. Don't answer when it calls you. Simple, like returning a borrowed tool. Not pleading, not dramatic. Advice, the practical kind that keeps your fingers attached to your hands. I looked that way and saw Petra, or what my brain would always let me call Petra. She stood with the same good coat, the same scarf, paper bag held small. She wasn't in the doorway. She was beyond it, where the color of the evening could still reach her face. In that light, she looked like any tired woman who gets the late tram and buys candles in bulk. How do I not answer? I asked. The question was stupid and honest. Use the name you keep for yourself, she said. The one you never wrote on a form. The one you think in when you talk to yourself after midnight. She paused. If you don't have one, make one now. You'll need it. The figure didn't move. The ash on the floor did. It made the first letter. The brush sat 2 meters away, and yet the ash formed the line. And I could see in the texture of it the place where a fingertip would have pressed if there had been a fingertip. I felt my mouth shape the beginning of the sound. I felt my mind reach for the pattern of the letters like a tongue seeking a missing tooth. I said a different word instead. A small one. A name I had used exactly once as a teenager in a dumb game, where you give yourself a secret identity and try it for a week. I hadn't thought of it in years. It came out dusty like it had been kept in a pocket. The ash paused. There's no other way to describe it. The line halfway made, the curve about to be dragged, and it paused as if someone in a room had realized they were no longer alone. Then it drifted, not fast, not like smoke in a gust, slowly, as if rethinking. The first letter unmade itself. The pale rectangle smoothed flat again. Outside, a tram bell dinged. The sound landed in the shed and broke the moment into ordinary pieces. Petra's shoulders lowered a fraction. She didn't look relieved. She looked like someone who had finally set down a bag that had cut grooves in her fingers. I won't keep it, I said, very quietly, not sure who I was promising anything to, or what it was. Keep your name, she said. Not that one. Your own. And you? I asked, but I didn't finish. It wasn't my right to ask her if she belonged to herself anymore. She set her paper bag on the shelf inside the shed and stepped back into the dusk without crossing the threshold. For the candle, if you ever want to say something and don't know who should hear it. Then she turned and went toward the main path without waiting for me to say thank you. She never looked at the gap. The figure in the doorway shifted the way a shadow shifts when a lamp is moved, and then it wasn't there. The ash stayed flat and blank. I didn't sleep that night, but it wasn't the bad kind. It was the kind where your brain hums quietly and doesn't make monsters out of the closet. I sat by the window and watched the city soften at the edges. I lit the candle she'd given me and kept it near. I didn't say anything to it. I didn't make a wish. It burned with that steady, home kind of flame that makes you think of kitchen tables even if you've never had one that felt safe. Since then, things haven't gone back to how they were. That would be a neat ending, and neat endings belong on television. The ash still shows up sometimes on the stone beyond the wall, but it writes other things now. Tiny, neat marks like practice in a foreign alphabet, or smudges that look like someone testing the pressure of their own hand. The tools are where I leave them most mornings, but once a week I find the trowel laid gently by the door like a gift or a note. I pick it up and say the small name, the private one, and the shed seems to exhale. Petra still comes. Once she handed me a thermos of tea and I drank it, resting my back against a stone that felt warmer than the air. We don't talk about the wall gap. We don't talk about the ash. She says hello to Clara and gives directions to people who look lost like she belongs here. Maybe she does. Maybe belonging isn't the same as being allowed to leave. 2 days ago, a man lit 3 candles at the main Polakova stone and stood with the wind blowing his coat open and his face set hard. He didn't cry. He put a hand to the stone and pressed it flat like he was keeping something in. When he turned to go, he nodded at me. "Thank you," he said, and I almost asked him who he was saying it for. I didn't. I nodded back and kept sweeping the same patch of path until the broom made a dull line in the dirt. If you're asking whether I think it was all in my head, I'll say this. I used to believe a name was a label. You pin it on and that's that. Now I think a name is a door, and doors are for passing through, and you should be careful which ones you unlatch in places that remember better than you do. I work in a place that remembers. I am not special here. I am just someone who said a word out loud once where the ground was listening. It's October again and the candles are starting to come in stacks. A new boy works afternoons on the western side. He said his name too fast on his first day, and then looked like he wished he could snatch the sound back out of the air. I gave him extra gloves and told him to keep a brush only for the lettering. I told him to lock his shed even if it feels silly. I didn't tell him about the ash. People have to learn what kind of ground they're standing on in their own way, or the lesson doesn't stick. There's a smudge on the Polakova stone tonight. Not letters, just a soft oval, like a cheek pressed to cool marble testing the chill. When I walk past, it feels like a held breath lets go. I keep my eyes forward and I hum low the way I do when I want my hands to keep moving. Behind me, something scuffs the path and the smell of a blown-out match coils through the air and thins until it's just the ordinary cold. I don't look back. I don't say my name. The small one sits quiet behind my teeth, warm as a coin, and in the corner of my eye, in that place where you can see truth better if you don't stare. The ash shapes a single letter that isn't mine at all. It's a P. It rests there a moment, then blurs itself, polite as a guest wiping their feet before they come in. I keep walking, and the dark keeps the rest to itself, like it always does, like it always will.